Well, hey there, freaks. It's your boy Marty here to introduce our sponsor, Cash App. You already know all about them. They're helping us stack sats. They're helping us save money at merchants. And they just rolled out a new UI. I don't know if you freaks have it yet, but they updated their UI last week. Bitcoin is now a first-class citizen in the app, and it is just very sleek, easy to use. Let's go over the details of what you have on the Cash App. Again, you can stack sats. You have the ability to buy, sell, deposit, and withdraw Bitcoin on the Cash App. On top of that, they have their Boost program, which lets you go to merchants like Whole Foods, DoorDash, any coffee shop. Taco Bell's on the list. There's too many more in the name. And you get this special Boost card with that. You get to sign your signature, personalize it. It's all good and dandy. On top of that, if you have not downloaded the Cash App yet, you've been listening to this podcast and have yet to download Cash App and you decide to download it in the future, make sure you use the promo code STACKINGSATS. That's STACKINGSATS, one word. You're going to get $5, and then $5 is going to go to our partner, Al's Lacrosse, based in Chicago. A very good charity doing great things in the west and south side of Chicago that we're honored to support here at TFTC. I hope you guys enjoy this conversation that Matt and I had with Richard Myers from GoTenna and Global Mesh Labs. Incredibly far-ranging conversation, everything from P2P, Bitcoin exchanges, to mesh networks, to deflation, to cashless societies. It was a great, long-ranging, long conversation. Hope you freaks enjoy.
Tales from the Crypt.
What is up, freaks? It's your boy Marty Bent here in one of our relegation studios in Brooklyn, sitting down with a couple of great gentlemen. We've been having a beautiful conversation with our guest tonight. Matt Odell's with us in the studio, and we've got Richard Myers from GoTenna and Global Mesh Labs. Richard, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks. Been looking forward to it for a long time. Love
Pumped
the show.
you're here. Pumped you're here because, GoTenna and what you're working on at TX10 has fascinated me for over a year now. I think the first time I wrote about TX10 was June of last year. We were talking about this around consensus, and it's been crazy to see the progress you've made over the last year. But we've been talking for like the last 45 minutes. Matt forgot his mic and had to run home, so Richard and I had a great pre-interview chat. You've got a very fascinating story of before you got to Bitcoin and your career before GoTenna and now working on Lot 49 and the Chain Code Labs residency. So let's just first talk about what you were doing with the microscopes and developing for microscopes basically in the community around that and how it prepared you for Bitcoin.
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I think working in software development is really, the primary thing I got from my last job. But what I was saying, as I'm here at Chain Code, sort of learning about the core development process, I see a lot of similarities when you've got going on 10-year code base, more than 10-year code base. And the project I was working on before was also a long single code base that had evolved over time, and it maybe wasn't as mission critical, from a financial standpoint, but we were still pretty resistant to make big changes. So that kind of, it was a small team. And I think, still with Bitcoin, it's a little larger team than we had at this microscope company, but same attitude that you're not making changes that aren't necessary. You're really very conservative because, every change introduces a bug potentially. So that development process seems pretty familiar. So I'm excited, actually. I have been a developer for a long time, but it's only like very recently and mostly due to the Chain Code residency that I've started to try to get deep into Bitcoin, from a development standpoint. It's really, it's exciting, but it's also sort of scary, because there's a lot to learn.
And you were saying your C++ experience has helped you out, right?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I didn't realize that would be so rare, but I mean, one of the advantages of being kind of an oldster here is that, that's what I learned, that's what I've been programming, and so it's not intimidating. I think, the other people at the Chain Code residency maybe have also had some C++ experience, but I think it's, I think generally it's not as popular a language nowadays, so... it's good. It's like those guys in 2000 who had the Fortran experience and, were like they were tapped when the Y2K issue came around. So I kind of feel like if you've been doing C++ for a while, it's good prep for working on the core software for Bitcoin too.
Hell yeah! So how did you become introduced to Bitcoin? I've heard this story, but for the freaks out there.
Yeah, I think my story is very typical. I saw it on Slashdot. I actually think my brother might have seen it first and sort of tapped me and said, hey, take a look at this. I've heard a lot of people give their origin story for Bitcoin. And I think the only way mine may be a little bit different is I didn't immediately think, oh shit, this will never work. I wasn't a cypherpunk. I didn't know the whole history of cryptocurrency. When I first saw it, I just thought, shit, this is gonna give us state-free money, and I was totally in. I had no doubts. I was only, I think another common theme that I think I also fell into is, your first thought isn't will it work? It's like, how can we make sure this works? Where is it going to be attacked? What can we do to make this work? One other thought though on that is just that my biggest surprise, I would say, is just how quickly it has happened. And I shouldn't have been surprised, but I feel like that anybody who's been around Bitcoin for a while, I think, is a little bit surprised that it's actually, taken off the way it has.
What were your expectations? Were you thinking this would just trudge along for a decade or two? And
yeah, I thought it would be a small niche thing for a long time. I didn't think it would go away, but I didn't think it would go mainstream. I thought it was just, pretty niche. I always like to draw the analogy with email. If you guys maybe aren't quite old enough to remember the land before email, but email was like that for a long time. The only people who used email were dudes in the CS department. I don't want to get in talk about this topic, but there were no women basically in those departments. So I remember when it became common for women, for girls, when you're in college, you want to send an email to a girl. There weren't that many. So a lot of the sort of similar feelings around Bitcoin, that
sausage fest feeling.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to be forever. I think that's just a momentary thing that's going to pass as it becomes more mainstream generally, basically.
Yeah, my wife's a hardcore hodler now.
See, yeah, I don't think there's any. Yeah, it's just about knowledge, just about finding out about it.
And what was your sort of path that you took? So you approached this more from a computer science, thinking it's more of like a breakthrough in computer science, or you're telling me before your dad had this very fuck the man mentality. Was it more that drew you towards this?
Yeah, I definitely was raised, in that individualistic philosophy. My dad, he subscribed to the Objectivist newsletter, and we had those sitting around the house, Ayn Rand, Atlas Shrugged, all that stuff. And so I think that sort of lays the groundwork. You sometimes hear people say that they were raised one way or the other, but Bitcoin got them into Austrian economics. And I don't feel like, in my case, it was sort of like the opposite. I really started with that already. And I think a lot of people have that history, and so that resonated immediately. And I've maybe gotten deeper into it now, with Bitcoin. But yeah, definitely fuck the man was the household word. So
And you're saying your dad was a fireman too?
Yeah, he was a fireman, but I could tell you some stories about that. He was not. He was a state employee, but he was not exactly down with the full program.
I feel like firemen of all the state employees are some of the most admirable, running into some of the most dangerous situations out there.
Yeah. Although I got to say, he, as his career sort of went on, he said that it was a lot less about fires and a lot more about like emergencies and things like that. So,
oh, really?
Yeah, it was more about medical emergencies than fires. Just the way things go. But there was fires. Yeah.
Is the life of a fireman odd hours? There's a lot of odd hours.
That's true. Right? Odd hours and no suits. So I think being a programmer is kind of similar in that way. You work some weird hours and you don't wear a suit to work. So I guess I'm following in the footsteps that way.
How did you and your brother get into software development?
Yeah, we were just talking about this. My brother was here in New York over the weekend. We picked up a book on BASIC, I think. Actually, if you really want to go back, there was a computer store, and they sold, this was like before PCs. So like just as the Apple was coming out, and there was this computer store, and we would ride our bikes to this computer store to play, I think the game was called Star Trek. And it was a total text cursor-based game, and we would ride our bikes just to go and sort of hang out at this computer store. And this was like a computer with like wood grain on the side. This is sort of that era. Yeah, I kind of miss that look. Eventually we got one at home, and yeah, and just sort of went from there. So I've been programming since we were, in our early teens. So
It's crazy.
I actually met your brother in San Francisco.
yeah.
You never told me you had an identical twin brother.
Well, we're not identical, but yeah.
Are you really not identical?
We're fraternal twins. Yeah, we're not
It's
identical.
not identical?
No, but if you don't see us side by side, it's a commonly people think we
Steve's
look
got a
alike.
bit of a beard.
I don't know. Even the mannerisms are similar. You have very similar mannerisms. He came up to me. I swear to God, I thought it was you playing a practical joke on me. I even checked his name tag and everything.
Yeah, I was worried about that. I told him, if anybody comes up to you, got to explain it. They're going to think I'm like the rudest SOB.
Well, I figured it out on Twitter because he started following me on Twitter, and I was like, Steve Myers. Myers, it's Myers. I've never seen it spelled that way. So I put that. I was like, these two look a lot alike.
Yeah.
And I guess before we get into the crux of our conversation tonight, what we really want to talk about, which is GoTenna, Lot 49, and TX10 and all that. Let's talk about what you and your brother are building. I don't know if Matt knows much about this, but ByteABit, which is a P2P mobile exchange. We were talking about this before. It seems pretty fascinating.
Yeah, I mean, sort of back to my history, the first thing I did when I really, saw that Bitcoin was cool and it was working is I just sort of iterated in my head, what kind of project? I'm a software developer. I got to do something in Bitcoin. And the one that sort of stuck out is that was around the time of Mt. Gox and the fact that exchanges, were the central point of failure. We weren't even thinking about mining centralization. This was just thinking about, the big issue of the day was centralization of exchanges. We had one major exchange. So that sort of put me on this thought about a decentralized exchanges, and that's about that's when P2SH was coming out, and 203 multisig was the taproot of its day, that was the hot technology, and basically been tinkering on that with my brother ever since. We've gone through a lot of iterations. We worked with the BISC project and try to support them because we thought they were on the right track, and it's just taken until now to basically, get something that we think is worth testing. So hopefully we'll get something this year, so I'll let you know.
No, you said you're starting in Sweden, correct?
Yeah, so I'm living in Sweden, so we're going to start in Sweden. They got nice non-charge-backable payment, instant sort of bank-to-bank payments, so we think that's a good place to start. And they don't have a lot of other good options, so we think Sweden might be a good place to sort of test the stuff out and shake out the bugs.
No, we were talking about it before. I didn't know. Sweden has one of the top population to Bitcoin holding.
Yeah, I mean, I don't
ratios.
think they're probably not the top, but they're pretty high when you consider how relatively stable the economy is. They're always in the top 20 or so, I think. So the per capita, it's a very small population. So if you just look in volume, they don't show up. But you do the math and you divide by population, it's pretty high. They're very technologically forward there too. I mean, everything is on the cell phone. You probably heard they don't carry cash.
It's very cashless over there.
Yeah.
Right?
So I think the idea of a cashless non-state money maybe also appeals to some too, because it's definitely a pretty big state out there.
Does the almost cashless society scare you at all?
Yeah, it's pretty scary. It's pretty scary for sure. I mean, there is no gray market in Sweden, I'll tell you that. And a lot of that is on purpose. Everything has got to go through your phone, and people. If you spend with cash, if you go to a place and you pay with cash, you get a little weird look.
Really?
Oh yeah. I mean, being back here in New York, I realized that, not only don't you get a weird look paying in cash, merchants appreciate that, but not in Sweden. It's and I don't know the full sort of psychology behind it, but yeah.
Yeah, so what I was just going to ask, do you find yourself self-censoring at all, or?
That's a good
not
question.
Not you, but maybe other people.
Yeah, I mean, I guess you would self-censor for sure. I mean, that's maybe a whole other topic, but Sweden is a homogeneous society, and you worry about what people think, and there's a lot of transparency in that society. For instance, you can find out what other people pay in taxes. That's part of the law.
Really?
Yeah, you can request that information. And it's because, you're your brother's keeper. Is he paying his taxes?
Can you do that
go
here?
check.
Or can you only do that for businesses?
I mean, I assume you can't, right? We don't know Trump's tax return.
Yeah, that's true, right?
Right.
Yeah, because that's the thing. Presidential candidates, that's why I got confused. Presidential candidates will typically review their tax returns.
They voluntarily disclose them,
Yes,
right?
exactly.
Yeah, no, that's, I mean, it's good and it's bad. I mean, I'm all for transparency, but it definitely is, it can be put to other uses too. And I mean, the state is more transparent, at least in theory, so that's also good. But yeah, financial privacy is not kind of considered a high thing out there.
Is it uncouth in Sweden to ask how much someone makes?
It's probably still a little rude. I mean, that's more like socially maybe rude, but in some professions, it's not uncommon to, like, if you think somebody's making more than you, you just go and ask HR and they'll tell you how much they make.
Yeah, I mean, because you can if you just,
It's pretty messed up.
you can go backwards on the taxes and just know exactly how much they make.
Yeah, I've never done it, so I don't know the details, but I just think, like, generally that's not considered private information. So.
I want to give a shout out to Matt here for using the word uncouth. Haven't heard it in a while. Very good word.
Thank you. I didn't even stumble when I used it.
Haven't heard that one in a while. No, it's fascinating. Obviously, because Bitcoin, somebody living in Sweden, which is basically going cashless, it seems like a very peaceful, conformist society, is building one of the most, or working on one of the, building, yes, one of the most sort of overtly, basically, middle finger to the state. And
let's hope they don't see it that way initially, but yeah.
Yeah. Well, so let's jump into it. How did you find GoTenna? What like you alluded to it earlier in the conversation that Bitcoin, Mt. Gox helped you realize Bitcoin centralization in one aspect, and that's why you're building ByteABit, and it feels like internet service providers being the main
I think
conduit for transaction relay.
Yeah, those are both. I mean, when you're a software developer and you're thinking about Bitcoin, you look for ways that it could be attacked. That's I think common for many people that get into Bitcoin. You think about these things, and for me initially it was the centralized exchanges, but also have been thinking about just the other communication attacks that could be happening. So I think I initially just randomly ran across GoTenna. I wasn't as early as Matt here with the GoTenna crowdsourcing.
OG.
You're an OG, yeah.
I wish Kickstarter gave you equity.
Yeah, that sucks. So, but I think I saw a Twitter post about it or something, and at that same time, I think the Blockstream satellite was being talked about, and I know I got to look up the exact post, but something Nick Szabo had said about it, and I responded. And there was a nice little conversation about like wireless alternatives and how radio could be used. And those things kind of clicked together, and I started to post on the GoTenna forum and doing research into like how that could be done. And one thing led to another, and I was posting on the forums, and then I was sort of consulting for them, trying to give them some advice. And I was telling you earlier that Daniela, GoTenna was taking Bitcoin from 2015. I don't know if you remember that. But some pretty early, they were taking Bitcoin on their website from pretty early.
Yes.
It was BitPay, unfortunately, which we've fixed, but but yeah, I hope they're not a sponsor.
No,
very
BitPay
few
would never be a sponsor.
No,
of this
BitPay would
podcast.
never
Yeah, I didn't
They'll
think
fuck
so.
themselves.
We are BTC Pay server
Nice.
users. They're not a sponsor.
Sponsored by.
Nor would we want them to sponsor us. The stuff that they build for free is awesome.
We help sponsor them.
Yes, exactly.
That's great. That's the way it should be.
Yeah.
So I was posting on the forums, and Daniela, I want to say was 16. I got to look it up, but she gave a talk at the Blockstack summit of some sort, and she just was basically putting out a call like, okay, here are the problems with mesh, and you got a decentralized network. How do you kickstart or how do you fix this sort of zero start problem? If nobody's got one, then who's going to get one? It's like the first telephone. If there was nobody to call, it wasn't very useful. So you had to build up that network effect. And I think very early on, so Daniela Perdomo is the co-founder of GoTenna, and she very early on saw the parallels with cryptocurrency also being a protocol, and that's really what GoTenna makes. I mean, they make these devices, but they really just make them as a way to run the mesh protocol, which is really their sort of technological innovation, is the way to route messages over this mesh. So they looked at Bitcoin and cryptocurrencies generally as this like protocol incentivizing its own use. That was something she talked about, and looking like what can we learn from cryptocurrencies, basically. What can we look at for Bitcoin? This was starting to get into 2017, where there was a mad sort of flourishing of different altcoins, but it's just sort of the idea that you can incentivize protocols with some system, and that was in her talk. So I sort of started posting on that, and eventually also worked with put her in touch basically with the Samurai wallet guys. So TX10, you guys had talked about.
Yeah, no, and it's crazy seeing the demos of them sending Bitcoin transactions through a mesh network, but just take a step back in general. It's like, as someone who considers himself someone of adult and is not an adult, it's like you never think of the attack vectors or the centralization of the information highways, if you will. I'll go back to a old 90s phrase, but like the internet as an internet service providers is the main sort of vehicles of transmitting most of the data that I send and use, other than, and on top of that, telecoms as well. You don't really think of, oh crap, like these companies have an immense control over the basically transfer of data in the world. And mesh network had never even come into my consciousness until I read what you wrote over a year and a month ago, I believe. And it's crazy to think that there are different ways. Like you can do it in radio waves, you can do it via mesh network. So, but these alternative networks seem pretty nascent right now. Is that correct in assuming, or? Yeah,
I mean, there are different projects going for different things. I mean, what we're focused on at GoTenna is what we would call a mobile mesh network. There's some other projects that have been around a while where it's more point to point. I think you've got one here in New York, so the New York mesh.
Matt Corralo's helping with that one.
Oh yeah, right. Yep, that's totally his thing too.
And that's like rooftop receivers on buildings.
Yeah. And the difference there from a routing standpoint, you don't have too much issues because everything is fixed. You just have a fixed network. But that's also hard to jumpstart. It's true for all mesh networks. And it's really, you can really look at Bitcoin as also a mesh network from a standpoint of, if nobody's got Bitcoin, then nobody's going to use Bitcoin. And if nobody's have relay nodes, then, you can't run the network. But I guess sort of the observation about mesh there is that all of these networks, if you look at torrents, if you look at BitTorrent, you look at Bitcoin, all of these are overlay networks on a centralized network of ISPs and service providers, like mobile service providers. So even though they're structured protocol-wise as being these meshes of peer-to-peer nodes, what they're running on is really centralized. And it's centralized here in the U.S. and getting more centralized, I suppose, as we get more consolidation. But you go to some countries and it's really like the national carrier. So you're really talking about one ISP that runs everything. China, for example, I mean, that's a state-based system there where, and they do shut it off. I mean, you've heard about Turkey, I think, was more, one of the big examples.
And we have the Great Firewall of China.
Venezuela recently shutting down.
We saw the war on BitTorrent here.
Yep.
Where they were tracking all your packets and sending you cease and desists, and doing some test cases where they threw people in jail, threw kids in jail, and gave you big ass fines. Yeah. And then we have like the vertical integration of the media companies that also own the lines as well, and then they're presumably like in the future going to start charging us to gain access to stuff that isn't in their portfolio. Like you can see the writing on the wall.
Is this why you got into mesh networking?
The war on BitTorrent was really obvious for me in the beginning, because I may or may not have used BitTorrent, but that is where I learned like what a VPN was, how internet censorship could be enforced in America fairly easily, and just like privacy in general.
And so let's shift now, asking questions to you, Matt. Why were you initially like kickstarting GoTenna? Like what piqued your interest with that?
So when was GoTenna? Was I already a Bitcoiner at that point? When was the Kickstarter? Was it 2013, 2014?
Yeah, about then. Yeah, it was 5 years ago.
When was Snowden?
Late 2012, I believe it was.
It was post Snowden. Was the GoTenna? So they had basically, all Kickstarters, they oversell, right? Mm-hmm. So basically, I saw this non-centralized communication medium, basically just text messages on your phone that presumably would be encrypted and not centralized. So it hit the two main things that we basically needed in terms of like private communications on like a local basis. Like even if it wasn't successful on a nationwide or global basis, like presumably we could get 10,000 people in New York to run it. And we could have like pretty private chats if there was any kind of protest, stuff like that. And then when I received it in the mail, they weren't able to do the encryption on Gen 1. So it was completely worthless. Everything was just, and there was no hops. You couldn't, it just had to be point to point. So you had to be like within a mile of someone, and there was no encryption, and it literally just crushed my dreams. So I sent them like the angriest email ever. And they said, don't worry, we're working on encryption in hops. I was like, yeah, bullshit. There's no way they're going to do it. And then they came out with the Gen 2 that supports both of those. And that's what the transaction tenna and all this is built on top of.
For an idiot like me, what's the difference between endpoint and hops?
Well, like now...
Point-to-point in hops.
Well, like now we can go, 7 hops, I think, is the max?
Yeah, it's limited by software. It might be 10, actually.
Yeah, so you can... If there's especially if there's relay nodes, people just like plug in GoTennas and just leave them places and fix places. If you're you could be 10, 15 miles away, and I can hop off of intermediary GoTennas until it ultimately reaches you. But, which is compared to, so I guess for a lot of these use cases, one of the competitors that they're competing with are the little walkie-talkies, the consumer radios, right? And they say they do 7, 14 miles or whatever. They really do 2 miles point to point. But they can't hop off of each other, right? So once you start adding that capability to the hops, you have there's really something you can build off of there, that you can work off of there. You can get some pretty crazy distance going, and then you can ultimately add bridge nodes and stuff like that, where you're way less limited. As long as there's a bridge node within 8 hops of me, then it can go out to the wider internet and then connect that way.
Yeah, and just lost my train of thought here. What the actual device is where I wanted to go. So the actual GoTenna device, it seems like a very apocalyptic survival tool, right? How long can it last? Let's talk about the actual device. What does it do? How durable is it, and how long can it go without a battery charge or something like that?
Yeah, I mean, I can talk about that. Matt's probably got a lot more of the history, but the current device, the mesh device, when it's charged, it can go about a day. So it's rated for about a day of use. It'll be more or less depending on how much use you get. The range, I think on our website we say 4 miles, but that's very dependent on where you're at. So if you're in the open, if you're out on the water, for example, you got nothing between you and the other guy, it can go much further. If you're in a concrete jungle like New York, it's going to be limited. It's not going to go through big buildings. And the thing is, this is on the ISM band. That's a radio frequency that's given for these sort of uses to people who want to build devices. And it's the same for basically everybody on this is a UHF band. But that's why the meshing with the hops is so important, because if you're in a dense area, you can turn that density into better capacity, into better range by hopping from node to node to node and getting around corners, getting over obstacles, things like that. You just need and then range is important too, because the longer your range, then the more people you're going to have within your area that you can hop through. So that's why things like Bluetooth, for instance, I think it's called FireChat. Was that the one in China? So this was an early example of how mesh could be used in really sort of the situations you talk about, like protests, where the government shuts down the internet or is monitoring the internet. But the problem with something like Bluetooth is it's very short range, and even Wi-Fi is super short range, and you need so many more devices to get a full mesh network. Whereas if you've got a longer range device, you need a lot fewer. So
whatever happened to FireChat?
I looked into it for a while. I think there's still some company there, and they might still be working on something, but it didn't seem like it was that active.
I don't think it was even encrypted, though, right?
Good question. I don't remember. It may not have been. Yeah.
And it doesn't matter. It was mostly based on group chats, and then it's if you're using group chats, there's always always assume there's a mole in there.
Yeah. I mean, it was great because the idea of just being able to communicate when everything is down. I mean, that idea, I think, and that's where a lot of when we look at GoTenna, what we're looking at, just something that you can use when nothing else works, and whether that's after a disaster because the government shuts it down. I
mean, we saw that here after September 11th. One of the main infrastructure points was the World Trade Center. So and also everything was overloaded because everyone was trying to call. You couldn't make any calls whatsoever, and that was the time when everyone needed to do it, right?
Yeah.
Well, so I guess that provides a natural segue into the next topic. How do you incentivize mesh networking? How do you get more devices in more people's hands and make it more of a common practice?
Yeah, so we're working on that. That's like I was talking about Daniela's talk. So the idea is, how can you incentivize people not just to use them when they, if you're hiking, your buddy's down at the trailhead and you're going to talk back. That's probably the most common use today. People aren't just walking out on the street and just being able to connect like they would with their cell phone. They're using it in like a walkie-talkie way. They know somebody's there to pick it up. And the reason is, no matter how big a fan you are, you're not going to remember to always have one turned on and just have it out there for everybody to use. And we think, adding just a little bit of incentive is the solution, but we don't want to add a centralized incentive. You don't want to do it in a way that basically creates a new point of failure. This is the same story with Bitcoin. I mean, you could do PayPal. PayPal is also a, person-to-person money. It's just there's one big centralized point of failure, and that's PayPal. Mm-hmm. So that's like, there's two sort of lessons you can get from Bitcoin and apply here to Mesh. One is that people will respond to incentives. I mean, the Lightning Network is really, I think, a good example of that. How many people got their first couple of sats, for relaying on the Lightning Network, and you're like, okay, it's worth, de minimis amounts, it's worth like nothing. But boy, do you feel good when you get that. It's not just the money, it's the feeling of I'm part of the network, and this is like proof that I'm actually working it. So that's what we're working on is basically to take that incentive idea and bring it to Mesh. And also the second idea is to bring the idea of a decentralized incentive, not just make it something that only GoTenna operates, but is a protocol like Bitcoin that can be used by anybody who wants to build hardware. And that maybe segues into this idea of, why do we have this new entity called Global Mesh Labs? That was founded very recently, and the thought there is that we want to make something that isn't a GoTenna protocol. We want to make something that is used by other hardware manufacturers and is built on as an open source project by the community. And GoTenna is definitely the sponsor of this, and they are our patron for doing it. But we don't want it to be a GoTenna only protocol. I think then it's again a centralized system.
Yeah, and you don't want to have like 5 companies like all working on independent like proprietary like networks. Like then we'll never get anywhere, right?
Yeah.
And to take a step back, the protocol we're talking about is Lot 49, correct?
Right. So we call it Lot 49. If you know the reference, there's a book called Lot 49 about a shady secret underground postal delivery service.
I didn't know this.
Yeah.
So what's the story behind Lot 49?
Well, that's just the name. I mean, that's just the name. But I just blanked on the author's name, but it's a guy you would have heard of. I can't think of the name of the author now.
The freaks will look it up and let us know.
Freaks will look it up. Yeah, I blanked. I'm drinking too much here. But that's sort of the idea, is that you've got, the way Lot 49 is what we call it. And if you're familiar with Lightning, which I think most of your listenership here probably is, that as nodes relay value from peer-to-peer, they collect a small fee. And there's also something in Lightning called, it's got various names, but you can also include data potentially in that. So what Lot 49 is really focusing on the data part of it. So less value, more data. And nodes that relay the data collect a small piece of the fee. So in that way, it's really maps well onto Lightning. And the real technical hurdle the protocol of Lightning is really well suited for this, we think. But where we have some, technical hurdles, it's mostly about the fact that mesh networks are low bandwidth. I mean, like Matt was saying, it's at least the GoTenna unit, and really anything that's gonna, you've always got this sort of trilemma, I think is the right term. You want to optimize for both power, range, and bandwidth, and it's impossible to optimize for all of them. If you want to go long range, you're going to have to use more power. If you want to go high bandwidth, you're going to have to use more power, and but power and then also the frequencies you use are going to be limited. So we try to make this lower band, work on a low bandwidth system. I mean, GoTenna is one example of a pretty low bandwidth radio, but something you can carry around in your pocket. There's other systems like HF radio. So Elaine Au and Nick Szabo in 2017 announced the high frequency radio, which can go hundreds of miles. I think they went like Rodolfo Novak. He was able to send data from.
He sent it to Adam Curry, the father of podcasting. Runs the No Agenda podcast. Did it via ham radio.
Right.
But the way they did it, they sent private keys, right? It wasn't a transaction.
Yeah, but the point is, it's very low bandwidth. Yeah. They send private keys also because hams. Well, there's a whole story there. I mean, you can't send encrypted information over amateur radio in the U.S. and maybe other
Is
places.
it illegal or is it
it's
just
illegal.
technically not possible?
No, it's illegal. It's totally possible, but you're not supposed to do it.
Oh.
I mean, even what they did was illegal. Like, you read Elaine's post about it, right?
No,
yeah,
I actually
that's a good
I-
post. Yeah.
Wired wrote it up, and like there was a bunch of people like, oh, it's illegal, you shouldn't be doing it or whatever, and she just was like, you're all being a bunch of bitches.
Elaine is great. She's
incredible.
But my point was mostly just that there are a lot of systems where low bandwidth is important, and you really just like, and this is where it really meshes nice with Bitcoin, because Bitcoin's all about running on the least hardware or the least bandwidth. It's all about minimal system. I mean, we're not in Fura nodes. We want to have it as decentralized as possible. So that meshes. Sorry, I was going to use that as a pun, but it goes well with the idea of mesh networks, where also you got to optimize for low bandwidth, small resource usage. So Lot 49 is really about taking Lightning as it is and adapting it for a low bandwidth system. So it could run over HF, it could run over these mesh radios, or even something like satellite uplinks. I mean, that's something that's coming around too. So Matt mentioned, you talked about gateways. So you build out a network, and as long as you can reach a gateway, then you can, a common question we get with mesh is, well, how do you get over the Rockies? How do you get over the ocean? Gateways. I mean, it's just like the internet.
So what is a gateway?
A gateway would just be something that can both talk to the mesh, it has a mesh radio, and also has something else, either a satellite uplink, or maybe a fiber optic cable. Maybe it's on the internet, or maybe it's got a HF radio. Anything that just moves you from sort of one mode of communicating to some other longer range mode. Or just so you don't think of meshing the world being everybody's connected on the same mesh. It's like the internet, where it's a network of networks.
It's almost like it reminds me of like the Caddyshack groundhog, where you can just like come up out of nowhere if need be.
You just like patch it. Everywhere's just patches, different things.
And I imagine that just makes it easier to route around centralization. Like, hey, maybe if this gateway is connected to the ISP and they deny it, maybe this other gateway will not, or something like that.
What mesh really helps with on like a day-to-day basis is like that last mile, that last 5 miles.
Yeah.
That's where you see like a lot of the major centralization happen, where you only have 2 internet providers that go into your apartment building or something like that. So if we can route around that aspect, and then you plug into the real internet, the global internet, then it could solve a lot of issues for us.
So the bandwidth issues that you were talking about earlier, how do we get over that hurdle? Is it getting more hardware in more people's hands? Is it?
There's different approaches. I mean, you can do quite a lot of interesting things with low bandwidth. That's the great thing about cryptocurrencies, Bitcoin in particular, is it doesn't take a lot of data. I mean, a couple of SMS messages and you sent a transaction. We're looking at more, what do you do to negotiate a Lightning transaction? It's really not much more data than sending a transaction. It doesn't even have to go to the internet, because you're just updating a channel between 2 people. You do need internet, because you got to kind of like anchor these things on the internet and close them on the internet. So there are other issues around that for anybody who's kind of got that question. But so that one answer is you don't need much bandwidth, honestly. And just like the lower your resource usage is, the more decentralized it can be. And that's like just the fact that you want to be able to run your Bitcoin node as like a Raspberry Pi. You also want your device to be as cheap and low, and easy to run as possible.
If you make it low cost, like, people will plug more in.
Yeah.
Right? They won't care. They can, if they're $30 devices, $20 devices, they don't use that much power, they don't use that much bandwidth, then there's no loss to just plugging them in everywhere.
Well, I guess that's the question I have, and like this is why I'm like optimistic about Bitcoin long term, is because I think there will be dual purpose hardware. Do you see like mesh networks getting built into dual purpose stuff? Like
absolutely. I was going to say that next. So that was one answer, is we don't need a lot of bandwidth. The other answer is you're carrying around in your pocket. I mean, everybody is carrying around in their pocket a 2-way digital radio that can go, super high bandwidth. It's just that isn't going to be unlocked by the cell phone carriers. They have no financial interest. They pay for that bandwidth, like, I don't know, millions, billions of dollars for that bandwidth, or for that spectrum. They're not going to willingly give up that ability to sort of, be the gatekeeper of that. But if you can bootstrap on whatever frequencies we are allocated by our government, to do mesh radio, and it isn't every frequency. Like the mesh that you started with, the first GoTenna, that was using a frequency where you're not allowed to mesh. It has a little longer range, but they just arbitrarily say you can't mesh.
That's why there's no hops, right?
So there
and
was no
also
hops,
there was no
yeah.
encryption. So
Yeah.
if you did hops without encryption,
It might have been
that'd
the
be
same.
miserable, right?
Yeah, and it might have been the same. Like some frequencies you can encrypt and some you can't. So
And then meanwhile, you guys have like the police version that's like way more powerful.
yeah, there's also, well, I mean, way more. I mean, there are licensed spectrum and unlicensed spectrum, and if you're like a first responder, like fighting forest fires, you're allowed to use other spectrum. And so we have another pro model which we use for that, and that has the good advantage that these are already teams of people like we were talking about who are out, hiking. They're out fighting forest fires or doing whatever they're doing. So they already, they've solved that zero start problem because they all have to use it. But it's a good point. There are other frequencies and we're limited to a certain wattage for these things too. Some of it is to keep the battery from dying, but some of it is just by law.
It's crazy to think of like how this all like different, like just even the concept of different frequencies, like commuting on different sound waves and stuff like that. It's for somebody who's again a dolt, when you try to comprehend all this, it's like there's so many layers to it. Like so there's so many fail safes it seems in the mesh network. Like especially if you can go to different frequencies. Is that correct? Am I correct in assuming that or?
Yeah, I mean what I was really trying to make the point of is that your phone already is capable of mesh communication. Mm-hmm. It's just the people who make it have no incentive to actually make that possible. So you're talking, when I send you a text message, we're sitting right here, it's going to go to some base station, however far away the base station is, and the higher bandwidth ones, you notice like 5G, you're hearing about 5G, they're going to need more base stations. It's higher bandwidth, so you have less range. That's the trade-off with range, power, bandwidth. But why does it go to the base station? Why doesn't it just go to your phone? You're sitting right here. That's not a functionality you're allowed to have on your phone, but it's capable of it. It's really just a protocol change.
So we're just waiting on wily entrepreneurs who want to give a finger to Apple and other cell phone provider, or not even Apple. It would be like Sprint and Verizon.
But it's a regulatory issue,
right?
It's the same. I mean, like Skype used to be P2P. Now it all runs through a centralized server.
Did not know that.
Microsoft bought it. Now it runs all through a centralized server. And it's just like the way the world goes. Like Bitcoin is an outlier. That's one of the reasons Bitcoin's so beautiful is because we're 10 years in and that hasn't happened yet.
Boss.
I mean, Bitcoin is a good example of, like you were saying, it's one of the rare examples where fundamentally the technology doesn't permit gatekeepers.
This seems so inefficient though. Like why wouldn't we just go straight to this if it's more like why can I not just send a message to your cell phone instead of have to go this seems like a human right issue.
It isn't necessarily more efficient. I mean, centralization's like banks are more, centralizing telecom is more efficient because they know where to put their base stations. They like central plan. We're going to get coverage. I mean, when we were rolling out cell phones, until cell phone got in there and they got their whatever, their license to do that area, there was really, there wasn't the density where people would actually buy a cell phone. So they had that chicken and egg problem they solved with centralization.
So it's more of an economies of scale problem than anything?
Yeah, you could say that. I mean, it's like there is advantages. Things are more efficiently centrally planned, but they're only more efficient to sort of like jumpstart. They aren't more resistant to attack. They're more easy to attack.
We've got a recorder tumble here.
Oh. Is that on me? Okay. There we go. Yeah, I mean, you see that all the time in the Bitcoin land too. I mean, it's much easier to run a centralized exchange. You can just, kickstart some liquidity and
or
then
a shitcoin, a centralized shitcoin.
Right, sure. It's much easier than trying to really ground up, sort of bootstrap something. And I think that's really, it's the bootstrapping is the hard part. It is more efficient if you have, like now that everybody has cell phones, bootstrapping a mesh network on your cell phone, I would think would be pretty easy but if you think of a world without centralized communication, that might have been harder to jumpstart. If you just imagine like there's no cell phones and now you're going to do like a mesh cell phone, that probably would have been hard to kickstart. Not kickstart from the company standpoint, but just to like get a critical mass of people. But now we've got it. Now we've got this critical mass.
Now the problem is control, right?
Well, now the people that are the gatekeepers of that centralized system are not going to give it up.
So how do you route around them?
Well, I mean, we have a frequency, so we have what the GoTenna mesh. That's a I see that as sort of a little wedge in there. If you can create a system where people start to experience mesh networking and experience being able to communicate without the centralized provider, we hope that you can expand that wedge. I mean, part of it is getting people to start using it. And then once people are using it, they're going to start asking, well, why can't I have a faster mesh network? Why can't I have more spectrum allocated to mesh networks? Because what you really now, people don't just become consumers of communication, they become providers of communication. Like you and you and you, everybody becomes their own cell phone company.
It seems like I'm hive mind almost at that point, right? Like,
yeah. And again, I got to always bring it back to Bitcoin, of course. And, Bitcoin, we're all our own little mini bank. And we've all got these relationships through our nodes with other little mini banks anonymously. There's an analogy there too. And of course, the banks that are, big centralized banks don't want to acknowledge that, but it's a viable way to do things. And I think it will become a viable way for communication. And I mean, that's what Global Mesh Net Labs, that's what we're trying to push, is that idea that everybody can be their own provider and consumer of communication.
And so with Lot 49 in particular, how does the mechanics of it work? Like when you're sending a Lightning transaction through a mesh network, do you have to communicate like, hey, I'm sending this through a Lot 49 protocol, therefore I have to set aside a fee to pay this routing node?
Yeah. It's, the simplest way to start thinking about it is if in Lightning, you have to establish a channel. So you'll have to establish channels with people with whom you're in radio communication range. And that would have to go somehow. There are different ways to think about it. We can talk about like the more advanced cases, but initially it'll go through a gateway. It'll go through some sort of internet gateway to set up that channel. And when I want to send a message now, I'm going to pay some to my next hop, and they're going to forward that payment on to the next hop, till it gets to the destination. And then when the destination of that message, so think of it like a SMS. Don't think of it like IP, traffic. Think of it, I'm sending you a SMS message or a signal message, an encrypted message.
I don't even know how that works.
Yeah, well, it probably works in a similar way without the incentives. It's just hopping over internet nodes instead of mesh nodes. But then when it gets there, the person who receives that message is going to return a secret. This is the same as the Lightning Network. And that secret is going to come back over the mesh, and as each node gets it, now they have some evidence that would allow them, if they wanted to go to the full Bitcoin network and collect some very small payment. But because they want to keep talking, they don't do that. They don't drop the payment on the internet over a gateway. They just keep it in their pocket, because maybe you're going to send more value and more messages. And this is again same as the Lightning Network. And that goes on until you either decide to break down the communication, or somebody goes out of range. And then, at some point, maybe you do drop it on the internet and get your payment. Or you keep it open and you just keep making those payments as they come up. Is that enough of an explanation? I don't know if I was clear, but...
No, that makes sense to me. And it's...
there was one thing I was going to say. Sorry. There was one other thing. You asked about, is this like compatible with the Lightning Network? I think you were wondering like...
Yeah, like, so would I be able... Like, that's what I guess what I'm trying to visualize and conceptualize in my mind. Like, if I'm working from let's just use our PTC Pay server node. Mm-hmm. If I'm trying to communicate with somebody or send a Lightning transaction to somebody who's receiving it via GoTenna, like, would I be able to send it from my node through a GoTenna mesh network, or?
Yeah, I mean, there would be some protocol changes. And the nice thing about Lightning versus sort of base Bitcoin is they have this idea of feature bits. So nodes can sort of support or not support certain features. So there would have to be a feature bit for whether or not it's, your Lightning payment has also got data basically going along with it. And there's some, what do they call it? There's something already that's been sort of proposed for Lightning, not Lot 49 version, but Lightning generally.
I mean, Lot 49 isn't
Lightning
primarily to send Lightning payments.
To send GoTenna messages, right?
You're using a Lightning-esque system to incentivize nodes to relay your GoTenna messages.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah. But it's important to know that this isn't a different network. I mean, what makes up the Lightning Network, really the thing that ties together payments both on the Lightning Network and on something like Lot 49 is the fact that the receiver of the payment /message reveals a secret. So, you could imagine, for example, like maybe your gateway is the Blocksat, is the Blockstream Blocksat, and how do you pay for data on the Blockstream Blocksat? Is you make a Lightning payment, and you give it some data. I mean, the protocol, of course, isn't the same, but the idea is that it could go over the internet. Also, it doesn't have to just go over the mesh. The mesh parts would be optimized in a way. They would use a different sort of messaging system. But the thing that would tie it together would be the fact that you're revealing a secret, and that flows backwards. And those contracts that you're essentially updating contracts with each payment or each message. That part would all be sort of compatible with Lightning.
Yeah, I temporarily got confused between TX10 and Lot 49 there. Lot 49 is just an incentive network to incentivize people to relay GoTenna messages.
Yeah.
And TX10 relays Bitcoin transactions via the mesh network.
And I mean, there is a little way you could sort of think of those things together is, what if your message was a Bitcoin transaction?
Yes.
So that would be a nice way to tie that all together.
That's what I was trying to visualize there.
Yeah.
That Lightning experience.
But then in that case, it would just be probably the data, like the package of data that goes along through the mesh and eventually gets to a gateway and then gets onto the internet. Could be a very high value message, If you think of it, it's not just, shooting the shit. It's a Bitcoin transaction is the data that is your payload. So,
but going back to like sat node, it's been crazy seeing that, like the messages people have been sending to the sat node.
Yeah, I love that Twitter feed they've got.
Yeah, it's like Mr. Hodl said, it's a boon for free speech. You don't have no idea who's sending those messages at all.
I mean, like look at, that's what I thought was so powerful about WikiLeaks, right? Was that I would watch movies, and 50% of the movie was irrelevant because the protagonist, like right in the beginning, could just dump it on WikiLeaks. Like you didn't have to go through like all the bullshit, right? And it's like the same thing with SatNode. Like you could just dump it on the satellite, and anyone who's running the satellite can get it. Obviously the Twitter bot isn't censorship resistant, but anyone who's got the satellite and is listening will receive it. And then if you couple that with something like PGP, then the leaker or whoever it is can develop a reputation where people start to believe, if he says things that turn out to be true, they start to believe that key, and then he has a captive audience like around the world with no middleman really, except Blockstream to a degree. But ideally we'll have more than just Blockstream running these things, right? So you'll have multiple different venues where you can go through.
Are you kidding me? Sending a message through satellite and Blockstream runs it? Freaks.
It's a Bilderberg satellite.
They paved the way. Thank God they launched that satellite to prove the use case. The use case is proving to be pretty crazy.
There's one guy who sends out the news every day for different areas of the world, and he signs the whole thing with his PGP key. And I thought that was just really cool, just like your daily news, just from like some random dude.
And there's been some people sending pay spins of paywalled content as well, so like routing around that as well.
Wow, I never heard of these things. I can't even keep up, but it is the idea of decentralized communication. Now, sure, maybe you say the satellites are centralized or the Blocksat company is centralized, but there is nothing stopping somebody else from doing this. I mean,
Exactly.
That's key.
That's why I love Blockstream, because they proved the way. Like, holy shit.
And I mean, they could also, you can send an encrypted payload to the Blocksat, but then
somebody would have to encrypt or decrypt it on the other end.
Yeah, you need to get the key to people another way, but you could presumably send an encrypted one.
This is like James Bond X.
Yeah, that was where I was thinking too. We were at the Spy Museum not too long ago, and it's like a dead drop. You could totally do dead drop information anywhere in the world. Like spies used to do this. They would leave a message or whatever, leave
the
it
bench at the park or something.
Yeah, and then the next guy would come, so they wouldn't know, But this it totally makes that redundant.
You can do it digitally.
Because the thing about the satellite is that it's passive, right? Like it's just broadcasting data. So if you have a satellite somewhere, you're receiving it. No one knows you're receiving it. You're not pinging for specific information. There's no identifiable information there, right? So it's dramatically different than, like, for instance, like if you run a full node and you're getting your block information from the sat node, like no one knows you're pulling that block information. You do it through the internet, everyone knows like you're pulling Bitcoin blocks.
Let's do a hypothetical live in the boonies cypherpunk dream house. What are you going to have? So you're going to have a satellite set up.
Of course, the Blocksat, right?
You're going to have the Blocksat set up. You're going to have a GoTenna.
You should probably have some sort of, hydro power, That's all you need to.
Hydro and solar. You need to have a little
Yeah.
stream that runs through. I have family friends who live in upstate New York, and he like dammed up a little stream that runs through his property, and just put a PVC pipe, and he just pulls some. Some energy
fresh
from
water?
the stream. For energy, he pulls some energy from the stream. He dammed it up with concrete and
has a
just
fan?
put a couple PVC pipes with turbines in them,
Boss.
and just gets a little bit of free constant energy.
Yeah, and this is where
Pretty
things
badass.
like the fact that you can run this is recently they've announced like that you can run the block set. It doesn't have to be a PC. It could be running on I think ARM64 they had it running.
Yeah, the
on.
Rock 64.
Rock 64,
yeah.
that's what it was. So you don't need a lot of power. Maybe your hydro is plenty. Rain or like whether it's day or night, you can still run that little thing on pretty paltry amount of data of energy. But if we're talking about mesh today. Of course, you can download your blocks, but if you want to pay somebody, you need a way to get it out there. So maybe mesh. Maybe you got a mesh node up in a tree, and maybe you've even breadcrumbed it back to civilization. And that's your way to get your transactions out. So that's the other
one
way.
of the nice things I like about GoTenna is so there's all these different projects that are working on mesh. The nice thing about GoTenna is that it's just any old average user can buy it, and to set up power for it, it's a micro USB port, which there's like a million peripherals that can go into a micro USB port. So you can set up external battery packs that have micro USB
that was
ports, solar panels that have micro USB ports, strap them to trees and stuff really easily.
Who was the guy in New Zealand? Was it CoinSure?
Yeah.
CoinSure, yeah.
CoinSure. That's what I was curious, like how, because he put them in bags and put them in trees, and you were saying
Put
they
them
had
in socks.
in socks, and you said, but you said they had like an hour of battery time, so you would have to hook
No,
up
not day.
A day, actually.
a day.
Yeah,
Excuse me,
yeah.
a day.
Yeah, but you put it in an enclosure, you throw an external battery pack in there, then you throw a solar panel. The solar panel charges the battery pack through micro USB, which is a standard, right? And then the battery pack charges the GoTenna through micro USB, and then you have perpetual power with some layaway through the external battery, just in case there's
Cloudy week
cloudy
or whatever.
days or whatever. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's super easy. Like any schmuck can do that, right? Like you can just strap that to a tree and
That's crazy to think about.
yeah.
Like, how do we get this all in a box? Like your satellite, your mesh network with the solar panel and external.
Well, what's
battery.
really fun is if you go to the GoTenna forums, there's like all these guys that are like basically breaking the warranty, like completely
Voiding
breaking the,
the warranty,
terms of
yeah.
service, of GoTenna, but it's awesome.
Yeah, there's a great builder community, and our engineers have been supportive, and they'll tell you, solder on this wire, solder on that wire, and there are things that we can't do as a FCC licensed company, but if somebody wants to break open their case, they can get pretty creative. In fact, there's even a company, I just blanked on their name, in California, I think, who is selling modified GoTennas. They put them in a Pelican case with a solar panel and give you the full thing with the battery, and people have put those up there.
Do you two consider this an absolute necessity going forward, like these alternative networks?
Well, I think it's a necessity to have some sort of decentralized communication. Maybe in the U.S. we don't need it right away, but there are some countries where I think it's, obviously Venezuela is showing what can happen. A lot of these countries, I think, you always got to think outside the U.S. We need it as kind of a convenience, I would say, but there are some places, China, for example, where this is going to become something you really need to survive if things go south.
Are you seeing it being adopted in these areas?
I don't think there's huge adoption of any of this sort of mesh stuff right now, but there's a huge interest. There's a few other projects. BTC Ven is on Twitter. They're
Shout out
building
BTC
another.
Ven.
I saw
Yeah.
the devices at Bitcoin 2019. Their devices are they're these little tiny,
Yeah, they're using
low cost devices.
Yeah, they've got a cool idea, and it shows that they obviously are living there and they know what people need. And decentralized communication. It's the poster child for why you need that. A, because the power is going out, and B, because the government's corrupt, and is shutting people down. I was one thing I was going to mention about the satellite. If you were like mining in Venezuela, you don't want people to know that you're receiving Bitcoin data, and you may not have reliable internet or low cost internet. That's a good use for something like a satellite receiver.
Right, but you still need to transmit.
Yeah, but the cool thing is there you don't need to transmit very much. If you're
Right.
mining, you just got to send out a block header when you get a block.
Right, use a VPN or
Yeah,
something
or
like
use
that.
it. Yeah, you could use a VPN, but if you could also use mesh. Nobody's doing that right now,
Right.
but in theory, you could go the other way with mesh.
And you could always, if it was high value enough for you, you can like basically
Right.
do like the least decentralized mesh ever and like wire, like set it up yourself
Yeah.
to get to some other housing development somewhere else.
I mean, we don't see anybody doing this, but I could see from a miner perspective, you might have your low bandwidth, ISDN or something, but you might also have a mesh backup.
Right.
That could be. It's a lot of these things work well together if you're worried about being really resilient.
I mean, I think as far as necessity goes, like in America, we can probably get away with encrypting our traffic through the regular ISPs. And the only way they'd be able to enforce anything would be to just ban encrypted traffic, which would just take down the whole internet, basically. Like the whole internet runs on
Well, they wouldn't be
encryption.
able to, right? Because of the...
Well, like your banking sites and stuff, like you just can't like use the internet if they just block all encryption.
But again, wasn't there a Supreme Court case in which encryption was deemed basically free speech?
Yeah, that's the PGP on a T-shirt.
Right.
That was like this old school cypherpunk stuff, basically.
But, I mean, I think a cypherpunk would tell you that we
Don't
shouldn't
expect
rely
that.
on that, right?
Right.
You should, like the Supreme Court shouldn't protect that, for us.
Yeah, there's a whole debate too about. I mean, you could talk about it's a right, right to communicate or right to privacy, whatever. But rights, I think the cypherpunk cypherpunk philosophy is that really the rights are the ones that you enable for yourself.
Exactly. And this is reminding me of my conversation with Connor Brown that I dropped today, and that's like really the power of Bitcoin and the beauty of Bitcoin is it helps you realize this need for individual sovereignty and no tool on earth, I would argue, enables this more than Bitcoin at the moment. And
Sure.
it's how do you wake people up? Like people are so dependent on the state apparatus, and people don't care about this shit. How do we get people to care?
They will. We put more and more of our
Before
lives
the boots,
online.
before their boots on the neck, though. Like
No, they won't until the boot's on their neck, and the boot will be on their neck soon. So it will happen. Like that, everyone has their moment. For me, right? We were talking about it earlier. It was BitTorrent. It was I saw throttling with video games. It was the Snowden leaks. We saw like the Equifax leak, right? All these things, the Facebook leak, all these things. You see this data leak. You see your rights get infringed on. You see something that you enjoy doing or that you found the powerful that gets blocked, and then you start trying to, as a human, you're curious and you try and figure out like how to get around it.
I have like a free Credit Karma account. They give me my credit card report each month, and at first time I checked like the list of companies that I've had data breaches on. For some reason, ClassPass was on there. I'm pretty sure I might have applied to a job at ClassPass at one point in my life, like for a product manager job or something like that. But I never signed up for their service, and somehow ClassPass leaked my data.
ClassPass was like a bundle workout program, right?
Yes.
Like you'd
I think
pay
it's
a
still
monthly
around.
fee and
Yeah.
you could.
Go
I think
to-
they're burning a shit ton of money though, right?
I would imagine.
Yeah.
But I was just like, what the fuck? How did my data get to them, and how did they leak it already? Like, I haven't even used their service.
No, yeah, I mean, my cousin is a musician. Everyone should listen to Odell Fox. Search for it on Spotify.
Odell Fox.
Yeah, he's doing the name proud. I went to one of his concerts in the city. I signed up for it was like some random ticket selling site.
AXS?
No, I think it was Ticketfly.
Okay.
And they lost my billing address, my shipping address, everything, my email, my phone number, everything, just for this one. Like I go to see my cousin's fucking show, and that's, it's like there goes your OPSEC. It's just all gone.
And this happened to me when I went to go interview Jack Dorsey in San Francisco. I landed and go to get cash out at the ATM, and yeah, a merchant leaked my data, so Bank of America cut my card down. And I literally was like, thank God I had the Cash App. Shout out the Cash App, sponsor the pod. I was able to transfer money and use that, but I would have been shit out of luck. I had to go get a new debit card.
I would have sent you some Marty. You could have just let me know.
No, I didn't have access to my bank account. Like, it wasn't, I had money.
I could have sent you some Bitcoin, bro.
Oh,
There you go.
that's true.
There's definitely a big problem or a big difference between this idea of sort of push and pull too.
Right.
Credit cards, it's a pull system, so they, I travel from different from all over the country, and when I get somewhere, if I didn't give them that notice, there's always the chance that you go to pump gas or something and denied, because their system is relying on surveilling you and knowing where you're at and knowing if that's a legit purchase. Because I mean, you got your private key on your credit card. You're walking around with that. Anybody who's got your name can basically clone your card and pump gas. So the whole system is just surveillance is built in. That's the way it is. And I think it's important to remember that what the 80s, 90s cypherpunks were against, that's what they were against. They saw credit cards. People weren't using credit cards, like before the 70s. And they were looking at, that was the sort of the privacy problem they were worried about. And it all came to pass. It's all true. Everything they were worried about, censorship, surveillance, now we just live with it. We don't even think about it.
I mean, that's when people, when we talk about privacy on Bitcoin, for instance, right? It could be better. Like, I'm major proponent of trying to make this as good as it could be. The alternative that we currently live in is fucking horrible.
Right?
The thing that everyone uses for payments right now is absolutely horrible. They can tell so much shit by your buying patterns. It's crazy.
Well, that, and then you have services like Venmo where people just openly say what they're spending on.
Well, those people are just dead to me. There's no saving those people. They know exactly what they're doing. Fortunately, Venmo has since switched to default private.
Good.
But it's like the OG Venmo users that are still on public are the ones who broadcast.
I was one of those idiots before, but then I was like, what am I doing? Why did everybody need to know I'm like buying or
I hated
sending?
It pissed me off so much.
Right?
Every time I went on the Venmo app, it just triggered me.
And think about, cell phones, bring it back to communication. That's metadata. That's really important. It's what you're buying, who you're, where you're shopping. But now we've got literally, our GPS phone tracking this all through a centralized place, and everybody you communicate with. I mean, if you want to know, this is what like people who look at terrorism, they want to know the metadata. They don't really care, what you're saying. If they know who you're talking to, they know enough about you that they can shut you down.
That's a lot of what Snowden revealed was like our drone program was based off of metadata, and metadata we're finding is not always as accurate as the analysts proclaim it is. Right? You have drones bombing wedding parties of innocent people and stuff like that.
Yeah. Well, they were maybe 90% right.
Yeah. Yeah.
But yeah, it's tragic. And I mean, you're right. That's what Snowden revealed, is that the metadata that's tied to your communication. I mean, why should your phone be tied to a single number? Like, why can't you just tell somebody, hey, my number with you is going to be this, like a public-private key system?
That's probably the worst one, right? Is the phone numbers.
Yeah.
Well,
because nowadays they carry with us for like basically our life, and people treat them like, Social Security numbers also are horrible. They should not be treated as private information. They're not private at all anymore. But they're basically treated as identifiers, right? They're treated as almost like a Social Security number on a global scale, and that's really bad.
That's why I was actually very impressed and happy to see Apple with their random email generator.
But part of me, I'm very happy about it, and I'm caught off guard and pleasantly surprised. But then part of me is like, is this like the Trojan horse? Is this like, like if you want privacy, you go with this closed source company that, is running proprietary everything.
But even so, like the merchants aren't able to connect your data between each other.
Did you see what happened with Zoom?
Yeah.
Okay, but did you see what Apple did after the Zoom thing?
No.
Apple forced
an upgrade
to stop what Zoom was doing, the vulnerability that Zoom was doing. But what if they did it for something else, right?
Yeah.
Like everyone thanked them for flexing there, but they could have flexed on Bitcoin Core, right?
In what way?
They could have just
said, you're not allowed to download this QT.
Stop Bitcoin Core from running on OS X. But instead they stopped Zoom's background web server application, right?
So we're basically depending on a benevolent dictator in Apple.
Exactly.
Yes.
I mean, there was a long time when you couldn't put Bitcoin apps on your iOS phone, right?
Right, yeah. It's still hard to get them going.
No, but we have like fifth pillar elements in Apple, so we're good.
Shout out to the Apple Pay team.
They're listening. We got you. Thank you, guys.
Keep stacking sats. No, but it is. Is it too far gone? The centralization of all these services, internet service providers, cell phone providers.
We hope not.
Yeah.
I mean, we hope people will go to decentralized options for communication, for money. I mean, one of the things that I find I find it sort of the compelling reason. People have asked us, why did you build on Bitcoin? Like, why did you do this Lot 49 stuff on Bitcoin? I mean, there's, we started in 2017. There was kind of a lot of, alternatives, you might say.
And a lot of pressure to do an ICO.
Yeah, we never had that pressure, but of course it's got to be considered because there's different technological trade-offs you take when you go with Bitcoin. But I think my argument, and what I think is a really compelling argument, is that the Bitcoin community is a very unique community in that they see the need for decentralized communication. And the zero start problem doesn't mean how do you get the world to use something. It's how do you get enough people that it's useful. And you don't need a whole world to do it. You just need a community of people who are motivated to do it. And I think the Bitcoin community is that like wedge community who's going to be growing. I mean, they'll be growing because Bitcoin's going to be growing. But they're also sort of educated about why you want decentralized communication. You want to be able to send this high-value communication, my Bitcoin transaction, and you want to do it anonymously. Everything is built around anonymity. So I think that's, it's not just the technology of Bitcoin, which is compelling for decentralized communication, but the community of Bitcoin that is motivated to actually be that early adopter of that technology.
It helps you like jumpstart. You need to get to that critical mass point.
Yeah.
No, but again, go back to, like, I've said this for a long time, that I think hardware is like the Trojan horse in being profitable in this space. People yell at me and tell me I'm an idiot, but
Rodolfo's doing pretty well.
He's doing pretty well. But again, going back to this is the theme for Marty for this podcast. I am adult, but I bought a lot of hardware and tested a lot of hardware and run a lot of hardware, and it is forced me as someone who considers himself a low information user to experiment with this stuff and learn more and again, learn about the importance of why to run this stuff and why you should contribute. And again, Bitcoin has these natural forces that force you this way.
Marty, you're not a low information user. Just FYI, okay? If you're a low information user, then we're set. We're so good.
Low information user in the subset of the 0.1% of Bitcoin.
Hey, there you go. Okay.
Yeah.
We are all early adopters still.
This is true. No, but it's fascinating. It's crazy that we all find ourselves here. Let's go back to your childhood. So, like, what growing up with your dad and your brother in particular, like, what were the messages that you tried to imbue? Because that's what we were talking about. You're trying to figure out how to imbue these messages in your children. Yeah,
we were talking before the pod about, I think back now. I've got kids. I'm thinking, like, how did my dad make me into a libertarian, or a liberty, freedom-minded guy? How can I brainwash my own kids that way? And there's nothing I can think of, really. Unfortunately, I draw a blank. He was very subtle, and I don't think he was trying. I mean, it's not like he was pushing us to read this stuff. But I think I don't know. I've got no answer to that. But Bitcoin is kind of that for society in a way. It's giving people a reason to think about it. So I hope Bitcoin will like open the eyes of. I mean, I've got my wife's got some nephews that I've given them their they have a birthday. I give them a little Bitcoin and. That's got a powerful effect.
Really?
Make him. Oh yeah.
How did you give it to them? Did you give them a paper wallet? Did you tell them to download it?
Yeah, paper wallets generally is how I've done it. I think my brother actually just gave some to one of the nephews, and I think he opened a wallet and transferred it to he got the mobile wallet. Kids. I mean, that's the great thing about the youth of today. They all have mobile phones. They're all they have never stepped foot in a bank. They're never going to step foot in a bank if they can help it. So the idea is a lot less, it's not a big hurdle for them to think about.
I sent my 13-year-old cousin birthday present, $250 worth of Bitcoin on OpenDime, and in the gift card, in the card it said, "There's $250 worth of Bitcoin on here." Parentheses the amount of Sats, because you gotta denominate in Sats for the Ute. And I was like, figure it out. And I don't know if it's just gonna go in the garbage and it'll never go or whatever, but I think that's the strategy you give them. You let them just dive the hell into it,
How old is he?
13.
Boss.
Yeah, he'll figure it out.
Dude, for our YouTube channel, the dude that created the app that allowed me to basically backlog all the episodes and upload them at once.
The back catalog.
Was 16 years old.
That's badass.
He emailed me. Talk about an ambitious 16-year-old. I don't remember his name off the top of my head right now, but he emailed me. His name's Riley. Forget his last name. Riley Wars, maybe. Maybe I do remember his name.
He cold emailed you?
Cold emailed me. He was like, yo, I noticed you have a podcast.
And you're not on
my
YouTube?
My mom listens to podcasts on YouTube. You're missing like a big market. Like I created this app to allow you to download all your
How much do we pay for that?
$9 a month. It's not that bad
That's not bad.
to download.
So like what you're not going to manually upload?
No, it
He's just
picks up
gonna
our
pull
RSS
the
feed
RSS?
and downloads it automatically to YouTube. Yeah.
I mean, it's the entrepreneur. That's
I
also
like the hustle.
entrepreneurial. Yeah,
He's
it's great.
16.
Well, my favorite was Spudio or War or whatever. What's his name?
Yeah, Rashid.
Rashid. Yeah.
Who's been hacking the hardware?
He like
wallets.
hacked the treasure at like 14 or whatever.
Yeah. These
That's
kids
pretty
are
cool.
on it, man. Gen Z. We discount them. They're on
I
TikTok
don't
and all that
discount them.
stuff.
I have faith in the youth.
I do too.
You don't have to have faith in like all 400 million youth. Like there'll be a solid 50 mil of them. Those are the guys who will lead us.
The intolerant minority.
Yeah,
of the youth.
that's how it is in every generation. The majority of people are just whatever.
Yeah, normies, if you will. Sorry, I didn't want to be disparaging there.
But your point is also, like in Bitcoin, a lot of people talk, how are we going to make this something that everybody can use? We actually don't need everybody.
Yeah.
We need enough, but we don't need everybody.
But what I think of is, so like, for instance, we have Signal, right? I'm an Android user. I love Signal. It's a step up above text messaging, right? It's the closest we have to iMessage. But the most used encrypted messenger in America is iMessage, right? Because it was default on a bunch of people's phones that they already had and have no idea that they're using encryption.
If I get
all,
that
right?
green bar on my iPhone, I'm like, ugh, you heathen.
So that's my issue, right? My issue is, especially someone that's so I'm privacy focused. I like running Android because it's open. I've always run Android. I've never had an iPhone, but I have pangs of it. I realize, like, especially in my fiat job, like if I switch to iPhone, the majority of my communications will be automatically encrypted because I will have everyone who's on iMessage by default, and then most of the Android users have switched over to Signal at this point. So I can hit them up on Signal. And so when I start to think about Bitcoin, I do have some small concerns there in terms of can we get people to actually like adopt this thing? Because I've been for the last 2 years or 3, however long Signal has been strong, been trying to get iPhone users to install Signal, and 95% of the time they install it once, they link their phone number, and then they uninstall it, and then I accidentally don't message them for 6 months because it goes to their Signal and they don't check it, and it's a fucking mess.
I love Signal.
Yeah.
Signal is one of my.
But you don't check it often, right?
Yes, I do.
Oh, okay.
I got notifications on, so I check it whenever I get a notification.
But then on the bright side is something like Telegram, which has like somehow masked a huge network effect in a matter of like 4 years and is not a default app in any kind of way. I mean, it could have better encryption, obviously. It's not by default and all these other issues, but that is pretty impressive that they could do something like that. So
yeah, it's the odd question for these apps and UI and UX in general. Is it luck of the draw? Is it word of mouth? What is it? Is it experience? Because Telegram and Signal seem like pretty similar experiences, in my opinion, as a user.
I mean, well, Signal requires a phone number, Telegram doesn't, which is a major difference. I mean, I think that's why I took off in crypto, right? Was because I don't want to give you my fucking phone number if I don't know who you are. Like, you have it. We communicate on Signal sometimes.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
But, like, in the beginning, it was Telegram, right? Because I didn't want to give you my phone number.
I think one is open source, like Signal is open source, but I don't think Telegram is it?
Right. No, it isn't.
Yeah, I think
And
that held
the
it.
encryption is proprietary, too.
Oh, okay.
Telegram launched an ICO as well. Aren't they supposed to start
Yeah, the
implementing
ton
that?
token or whatever.
Yeah. We'll see how that works.
But
out.
Telegram is more useful for group chats, where
That's
Signal
right, yeah.
doesn't compete with that. Signal's group chats are weak, and Telegram has like channels with like 400 people in them that are like communicating pseudonymous. You guys get
Pseudo-anonymously, yeah.
There you go.
Yeah, we've I don't want to say derailed. We're on a big tangent here about like decentralized systems, and And again, I like the point that you brought up. We don't need to make it vogue. We only need a critical mass of people who use it to make it work.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's not that we wouldn't. You benefit from having more people. I mean,
Yes.
that was the point. I think again, in this, you always go back to the Cypherpunk Manifesto. They're sort of saying we can't have privacy unless everyone has privacy. You know, if you're the only guy with the mask on, you're not really that private.
There was somebody like that at Bitcoin 2000.
Oh, really? Yeah.
Do you remember that dude walking around? He had like beads coming.
Yeah, we
down?
all knew who he was, but
Yeah.
I didn't see his face. You never saw his
No,
face.
but I was
right?
like, you're drawing more attention than you are.
Yeah,
taking away
it's
from
not
it.
we didn't know who
yeah.
it was.
But for Bitcoin, you also, I mean, there's this philosophy too that you want the system. Who is the enemy? You know, who's going to shut down Bitcoin? It's
Right.
going to be a state government. It's going to be something like that. And the more you want it to be harder to attack than defend. That's cryptography in a nutshell.
That's what I don't get when I like argue with shitcoiners. I'm like, we're like, it's state resistance. Like that's what we're going for. They're like, no, the state's never gonna go after us. Then I'm like, what the fuck are we doing here? We might as well just be doing PayPal because like, oh, PayPal's just voluntarily blocking people's transactions, right?
How
Fucking
how
ridiculous.
ass backwards is that? Like,
And then the other thing I'd like to touch, Zcash. Did you see it came out that Zcash has had 1 to 3 shielded transactions per day? Like if you
1,
have
2, 3
yeah one
out of how many overall transactions?
like 3 transactions per day were private transactions.
no, but
on
like
average.
how many transactions happen on the Zcash?
I don't know, like probably a couple thousand or something. I
Yeah.
don't know for sure.
Absurd.
But still,
I'm gonna
like,
say it now. I'm a little whiskey drunk. I think Zcash is a honeypot. I think Zcash is a.
But I've said that 2 years ago or whatever. I got into the front page r/Monero is the easiest fucking thing in the world. But I mean, yeah. I mean, how do you run a privacy-focused business
not be inherently private.
in America with American investors?
With JP Morgan as one of your main investors.
No.
It's a little sketchy.
I was saying that earlier too. I mean, this is an interesting like meta question: is how do you like fund a Bitcoin business when the whole thing is based on getting rid of gatekeepers?
Exactly.
I think that is not really, nobody's cracked that. If you look at who's making money in Bitcoin, it's the exchanges, totally centralized, totally, they're kowtowing to every KYC AML
Not
they can.
necessarily. What about like, I guess like Binance is now bending the knee, but I like Bitfinex and BitMEX are like cowboy companies, right?
Yeah, so far.
Let's give a shout out to them. I mean, so far, I think BitMEX will probably be more resilient in the end because they're Bitcoin only. I think the first principle design of being Bitcoin only, closed loop system.
No fiat.
No fiat was genius.
That is.
It's
that
not
is good.
shitcoins that we're talking about. It's no fiat is
Yes.
the key.
Yes.
I mean, shitcoin is the ultimate shitcoin.
But no, but you can only, from what I understand, deposit and withdraw Bitcoin.
Bitcoin.
You
That's
can
what I'm saying.
trade other
It's the
things.
no fiat is the key.
Yeah, but like but they have like shitcoin swaps.
Yeah, you can short a
But
long
you're not gonna withdraw Tron from BitMEX, are
No,
you?
you're not allowed to. You
Yeah.
can't.
Yeah. See, that's genius. That like sort of creates that resilience that you need just by being Bitcoin only, and that's hard for people. I mean, the allure to that's actually what I'm interested in. Like, how does Arthur liquidate some of his holdings?
Well,
into,
he's not Bitcoin only.
No,
like, he
he's
has
not.
like OTC dealers and shit like that where he sells.
But you look at like Kim.com. I mean,
Right.
the U.S. can go after you anywhere in the world if they know who to go after.
Yeah, what did they do? They had helicopters.
Yeah,
taking-
and that was the MPAA. That was just, that was really motivated.
That was
It
Hollywood.
was the BitTorrent wars.
Yeah, that was the
basically.
BitTorrent wars. But
Yeah.
I mean, we haven't seen this level of attack for Bitcoin, but we know that's how they roll. Like if that's what they want to do, they just send in the helicopters, and your mansion is invaded, and you go to jail. You get an illegal. Even if you don't go to jail, you're tied up for years in legal wranglings.
And wait till the autonomous drones, then shit gets interesting. Off the shelf autonomous drones, you don't even know who
They're
sent
already
them.
here.
You don't, but you don't even know. The key is when you give them the kill decision, and you're not like right now. Most of the drones, you're operating them through satellite. You have a human controller on the other side that's deciding when to do anything. When you start sending them out and they're just making their own decisions, and you just have a swarm of just Chinese parts, and no one knows where they came from, like you can do some crazy fucking shit.
It's scary as fuck, dude.
that cabin out in the woods is sounding better and better.
Right?
I don't know. You need
Sweden-
to have some anti-air.
You just got to be like off the grid to the point that nobody knows where to send those drones.
Yeah, you shouldn't have like a podcast.
Yeah, too late.
Yeah, no, definitely not. Especially if you're not trying to get deep faked in an audio world.
No, the deep fakes will be good for us. I'm excited for the deep fakes because then it gives us plausible deniability.
I like that. Yeah, but
It's like CoinJoin for speech.
are we again?
It's like I didn't say that. That was a deep fake.
This is a question we haven't asked in a while on this podcast. Utopia or dystopia? What are we headed towards? Like, because this is very dystopian. Like, this scares the shit out of me. Will this be good? Will we only be like radar droning bad people, or will good people get droned as well?
What's a good person or a bad person?
That's a good question, right?
I think the problem with, utopia, dystopia is that one man's utopia is the next man's dystopia.
Very good.
I mean, you've got still people who are lamenting the fall of the Soviet Union. They like that lifestyle.
Really?
Oh yeah, sure. You'll find people who grew up in that system. I mean, I don't think it's a lot of them, but it was a comfortable life. You didn't have to worry about anything. And you hear people say that. Every dystopia had somebody who, after the fact, sort of misses it. So I think when we go to our fully, sovereign individual style society, it'll be the utopia for some, but it'll be the dystopia for others. So bankers, not bankers, central bankers, it'll be a dystopia for sure.
I'm gonna
It
go
already
with
is for them. They can't handle it.
I'm gonna go with utopia because why the fuck not? Might as well just be optimistic.
I love to err on the side of optimism. Like, I hope the goodwill of the human spirit shines through, because I do believe 99.9% of people are good people, right? Like,
Yeah, since we're getting philosophical, I think it's interesting to think of like this period of time too, as we're kind of faced with two alternatives, and one alternative is the social credit, turnkey totalitarianism. And you could say that technology enables a level of dystopian society that we haven't really had before.
maybe we're already living in dystopia, like me scrolling down, refreshing Twitter every day.
Maybe. But I like to think we're at a crux, like we're at a turning point. We have the technology to enable both outcomes, and it's being decided. It's being decided which way wins.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be careful about that because I think that we are probably living in the best time in the history of the world right now. So, I wouldn't say I like to call it a dystopia would be incorrect. And I think that I did not have
Would
hope.
it though?
Bitcoiners give me hope, right?
Maybe that's what a
Bitcoin
dystopia
gives me
is,
hope.
though, where you think you're living in a paradise, but you're like so
No,
mentally.
I think if you look back in like human history, like the majority of human history has just been like violence and death.
Yes.
And like we are living in like a time period, especially in America, where there's an absence of that. So to say that like,
So there's an
right?
absence. There's an absence of that in a violent sense, but you also have opioid addiction at all-time highs. You have heart disease at all-time highs. You have things like obesity at all-time highs, suicide rate at all-time highs.
But compare that to like the feudal system, right?
So
Or like World War I, or like World War II.
yes,
We're ratcheting up. I mean, I think I would agree with you, Matt, that, utopia.
I'm trying to play devil's advocate. I
Yeah,
agree with
yeah.
you guys. I know.
But I would still maintain that even though we're ratcheting up, you have this. You at least have this glimpse in different countries like China, where of a way it could go, and it would be hard to recover from. I mean, nothing is forever, but it would be hard to recover
Look
from.
at what happened. We haven't talked about this yet. What happened in Hong Kong? Like the triads going and attacking the protesters.
Oh my God, that's so fucked up.
So crazy.
But on the flip side, we saw it live through a live stream on Twitter. That's pretty crazy, right?
That is the beauty of Twitter. The ultimate empathy provider. It's like, holy shit, these people should not
And
be being
just
attacked.
like communication, right? Communication's on like a whole nother level. I mean, there's definitely a path we go here where it could be horrible. But especially what we surround ourselves with, the three of us, I think there's a lot of hope, right? There's a lot of hope there. There's a lot of very smart people, very dedicated people
I'm very hopeful.
that are like
I just want to hash this out, Pun intended.
we talk about like OPSEC and stuff, right? Like, why are we here today recording this podcast? And we're here because, we're dedicated to this mission. We think it's very important. And we're willing to put shit on the line for that, right? So, and I think there's like millions of people around the world willing to do that as well, and that's what gives me hope.
Absolutely. And what you said earlier, too, I think is also worth remembering, like in the context, you said that there are more good people than bad people. And I do think that's true. I mean, some technology can kind of give leveraged power to a small minority of bad people, but overall, the majority of people are good and are going to vote in the way of I don't mean like at the polls, but
action.
by action. They're going to act in a way that sort of takes advantage of good things.
We saw it in the blackout here in New York City a couple weeks ago, where you have the Upper West Side completely lose power. The people at Carnegie Hall come out.
Midtown was out.
Yeah, Midtown.
Times Square was
down. And you have
it was probably the best time to ever be in Times Square.
You think it would literally one of the most busy epicenters of any city across the world, and all the power goes out. You think there would be chaos, but yet you have people directing traffic. You have people and Carnegie Hall coming out and giving a live concert for free to the people on the streets and stuff like that. And one of the most despotic and dirty and old infrastructure cities in the world, where you have this calamity happen. It wasn't a calamity, but it was a pretty big shit show for New York City.
Our mayor wasn't even in town.
Yeah, he wasn't even in town.
I mean, and then you look at the 70s, and it was just all looting and just a complete fucking clusterfuck, right?
So progress is up and to the right.
I think also, a lot of Bitcoiners, sort of, you think of anarchy and that has a negative connotation, but if you are optimistic generally about human nature, that's sort of the argument for, decentralization, is that people will self-organize positively if that's given the opportunity.
The way I look at anarchy is it's the right to choose who you associate with, right? It's I choose my relationships, because if you look at Bitcoin, for instance. I feel like in most situations, I feel like we're one big ass fucking family, around the world, right?
Mm-hmm. No.
So anarchy doesn't mean chaos necessarily.
Well, that's the whole sort of Orwellian propaganda around anarchy, is that we've been taught to believe that anarchy is chaos. When you're learning about Roman and Greek history, I feel like whenever anarchy is brought up, it's everything was crazy, people were killing each other, and I don't want to get into conspiracies about the American education system, but that's the connotation I was taught when I was taught about anarchy when we grew up, specifically in Roman and Greek culture. And I thought it was anarchy, avoided at all costs. But at the end of the day, anarchy is just individuals making decisions for themselves in their best interest.
Yeah, I mean, I know some people who live out in the country, and whenever I hear somebody making the argument, but who's going to build the roads? Well, they live in a place where they have to build their own roads. You know what? They got a road society. They all pay into it, and they build the roads. It's I'm sure people will argue against, that as being generalizable, but I think generally people organize themselves when there's no other alternative, and do a better job.
I mean, to play devil's advocate, we never would have gotten our nationwide highway system if we weren't trying to move nukes around, right?
Yeah, I mean, that was it.
But then you can argue
FDR did it.
It was during
FDR did it.
No, it was later.
World War I, so planes could land.
No, it was later.
No, I don't think so, man. FDR did the highway system.
I'm 95% sure that we expanded the highway system during the Cold War to move our nukes around very easily.
Well, we may have expanded it, but the highway system in its original inception was FDR. Yeah. I'm pretty sure.
But either way, they're both centrally planned government initiatives.
Yes.
I mean, take it one step further. Would we have gone to the moon without a centralized government?
No, absolutely not. We didn't even really do anything.
What do you mean?
What did we do?
Soundstage?
Yeah, I mean, what did we do? We landed there for kicks, right?
Right. And when I think about that, of course, right now it's the anniversary of the moon landing, and what I think of when I think of that nowadays, I'm thinking maybe we shouldn't have. Honestly, I mean, really, it was really a PR stunt.
That's what I'm saying,
it was
right?
A flex.
It was a little bit ahead of time.
Yeah.
It was ahead of time.
Yeah, I mean, I would have liked to see us learn about science and space and all the good things, but you guys are familiar with this idea of the seen and the unseen. What's seen is you go to the moon. What's unseen is all the other uses that money could have been put to by the people who earned it. I mean, this is.
I mean, I think
old
NASA
story.
should have more money than less money, but I guess that's besides the point.
Space, it's crazy that we haven't been back there in 50 years.
Well, look,
that's why I liked Bezos's. I'm a Bezos guy over a Musk guy when it comes to space, because I think Bezos actually makes a lot of sense, where we should actually go to the moon and make a base on the moon, because if you want to send rockets further into space, there's so much less gravity on the moon that it takes so much less kinetic energy to do that.
Well, then what's Elon's?
Go straight to Mars.
I mean,
you have to go from Earth to Mars, and Bezos is like, let's go make a moon base. It'll be a lot easier to get back to and from Mars.
The difference between Bezos and Musk is Bezos is thinking Earth-centric, and Musk is like, we need to save Earthlings by leaving Earth, right? Like I feel like he's trying to.
Again, I tend more
like
towards. I'm not as alarmist as Musk.
I'm pretty sure. I'm like, didn't he get kicked out? He got kicked out of PayPal because he was thinking too big, and they couldn't monetize off of what he wanted to do.
Really?
That's his playbook every time. It's like he just has these huge visions, and then he like does things to try and make those visions a reality. And I respect that shit. Like we need more of that.
Elon blows my. I mean, the controversy around Elon blows my mind. People are either really pro Elon or like Tesla Q type people. And I don't know where I fall. I just know he's sending rockets to space and landing on small squares in the ocean, which I think is incredible. But a Tesla car ran over a pedestrian yesterday. So
I mean, I'm a big believer that we're going to see development in these things when there's a profit motive to do it, right? Not when we're just spend a bunch of money and time and lives to just like land on the moon and take some pictures, right? But when you can actually like make money doing it, then we will like look at like exploring the Americas. Like it was all done by private companies that wanted to make fucking bank.
Explain that. Dive into that.
Wasn't it all done by private companies that wanted to make bank? Like all those expeditions.
Yeah, the sugar trade, the rum trade, all that stuff.
Like Christopher Columbus. Christopher Columbus was like a private expedition that he did have government help.
I mean, let's also recognize that a lot of the private entities back then were probably slave
or like the
trades
the East India Company, right?
Yeah,
like
East
stuff
India,
like that.
First ever company to have a stock.
These are all companies that wanted to make a profit motive, and the profit motive was going to these lands that hadn't been developed yet, right? That they could lay their claim in.
This is actually a great argument for capitalism here, because they help bring the prices of everything down by going on these adventures and being able to transport these goods to and from these faraway areas that had never been explored before. Which were slow steps towards the crazy the crazy world we have now, where we have some camera videotaping us like remotely. We're talking through microphones here, and we're going to record this on the internet later. But that's where it started. It was enterprising individuals and companies saying, hey, I'm going to fucking do this myself.
I mean, that's where like Lob 49 comes in, right? It's not just taking a picture on the moon. Like you can make money running a node, right? And like more people will do it because there's money to be made. That's just how things are.
Yeah, I mean that's the reason that we're making a protocol too. I mean we have a device that we want to use this protocol with, but it's going to be open for anybody to think of some better way to do it. Some better way to earn value for communication. And we'll see. I mean, who could imagine all the crazy things that got built for Bitcoin? I mean, like the cold card, the hardware wallets.
I love the cold. Do you have a cold card yet?
I do. I have to still set it up, but I love the idea.
It's very easy to set it up.
I love the fact that it's programmable too. I mean, that's pretty awesome. The fact that it's open source. I mean, open source. I mean, that's the whole open source community is also, it's great. You don't have to develop everything in house now. You can let your community basically develop cool stuff. Protocols are really just a pre-negotiated contract where, people are going to follow the same rules, but, what you do past that, anybody, can sort of innovate. In Bitcoin, you got Bitcoin miners, you got a whole ecosystem that's incentivized by this protocol to build different types of hardware. We got the nodl, we got all these cool things coming out, and that, we're talking about capitalism, but, you set some sort of rules and then you just let people innovate. You let people do what they can to increase the value of the system. I think that's where why Bitcoin is successful is it's kind of it because it has no gatekeepers. You don't just have one company doing patenting hardware wallets. You've got everybody, and it changes over time. Is if you don't keep up, you lose.
They viciously compete, as we're finding out in the last 6 months, and whether it's hardware wallets or CoinJoin implementations, it is people putting that on the market and competing heavily. Which is, again, that's I haven't harped on this on a while. I haven't harped on this in a while on this podcast, but again, a phrase that I learned when I was playing high school lacrosse. We were a very good team, and we had very good coaches, particularly my freshman through junior year, who really instilled very good lessons into me and my brother and everybody who played on those teams. But the one message was you're only as strong as your weakest link. And I think in Bitcoin, that message is accentuated and very true. It's like you are only as strong as your, like if internet service providers can stop you from relaying message, that's your weakest link. You may have a lot of mind share on this network. You may have a lot of distribution. You may have it in a lot of hands of people. But if the weakest link is internet service providers and they can just flip a switch and shut it down, we're fucked. Like nothing else matters at that point. And that's why I love Bitcoiners. They're always trying to find the weakest link and make it stronger.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, that's why when you look at projects that are more centralized, they might get stuff done quickly initially, but they can't really compete against a decentralized, like ground up innovation, because you just can't be everywhere. You can't be looking at every problem. So, a large decentralized community is going to maybe get slower for the uptake, but in the end, it's going to have legs to survive. I mean, that's what we're all here for, is to see it survive. I mean, I don't think Bitcoin has to go up in price. It doesn't have to do anything. It just has to survive. And that's
Orange
the strength.
good, number go up.
That too. But I mean, the funny thing is there's a weird phenomena with Bitcoin was when, Orange coin goes up, it maybe unlocks development talent. It unlocks people who maybe had to work a day job and now they work for Bitcoin. You talked about the fifth column. I think there's strong fifth column in Bitcoin in not just technology companies like Apple, it's governments, it's
Patrick
everywhere.
McHenry.
You think he listens to this podcast?
I hope you. Yo, Patrick, if you're listening, come on the pod, dude. We'd like to talk to you.
What's the name of the shitcoin congressman?
Davidson, maybe?
William Davidson, is that right?
I could be wrong.
I feel like he listens. He might even comment as a nim,
We got... Yeah, he listens. I'm just going to say
Look,
he listens.
There you go. That's why, we've said hi to Vitalik on this podcast, which is no way Vitalik listens. So we might as well pretend
Vitalik
he
listens to
listens.
this. He's a huge fan.
Oh,
Have you seen the narratives that have been adopted in Ethereum? Sound money, all that stuff. He definitely listens.
We should run ads, just Vitalik's favorite pod, TFTC.
Oh. For you freaks out there, this is Vitalik's favorite podcast. He's been adapting all the narratives we've been talking about for the last 2 years. Actually, it hasn't even been him. It's been other...
No, but that's why I'm here, right? Like Bitcoin went up in price, and I foresee that one more bull run and I can do this full time, and I really want to do that. That would be fucking dope. Right?
Yes. We are not doing this full time yet for you freaks that don't.
Right, but because Bitcoin price went up, I'm willing to do it part time, right?
Yeah.
I think the price going up is like more important than people realize, but it doesn't matter. Like, you don't have to harp on it, because I think the price will continue to go up, which people give me shit for. I remember like the bottom of the market, Udi, who I really respect, was like, it's really irresponsible for people to assume that the price will just keep going up forever. And I responded underneath him, that Bitcoin's designed to pump forever with like shrug face or whatever. And I really believe it. Like, I believe that Bitcoin is designed to pump forever. It might sound irresponsible to you. I think the pumps will reduce over time. The volatility will shrink. But like, if you have a fixed supply asset that's being adopted by a growing number of people, like the price is going to keep going up. Like, that's how it's designed.
Supply and demand works that way.
And it's the ultimate way to drag people in, because you can't keep ignoring something when your buddy is going, when his value keeps going up and he keeps shilling it to you over and over again, right?
I was the terrible Bitcoin friend on the bachelor party last weekend. As soon as I had like 3 drinks on me, I was like, who's gonna buy Bitcoin next?
We were shilling it to your buddy on air. He was like asking me the questions that I always answer at like every single party.
Yeah, I answered a lot of those this weekend.
It's funny because, for me, I'm in a little different age group, I guess. But, at family gatherings, the whole family gathering, I can remember a few years ago, it's just like holding it in the whole time. I can't talk about it. I want to talk about it. I want to talk about it. I can't talk about it. But
because you're a meme, right? You're a meme.
Well,
like, everyone's like, oh, Richard's just going to show us Bitcoin, right?
Yeah, not even chill, but just like that's all I wanted to talk about. But now,
that's the thing. It's not it's not that I don't care about what other people have to say. It's like, this is all I want to talk about.
Yeah, I don't care if they buy it. That's all I want to talk about. But now we're like, now I've got like nephews who want to talk about it now because they have a little and they're watching. You know, so it's sort of like it's like not, I don't care as much about the price as just having a community of people that, you know, so I'm not the only guy talking about it. Of course, price is always important, but it isn't, you know, socially, it's nice to just have it be, you know, President Trump is tweeting about it now. I can talk to people about it now, and it's like, yeah, you can think this isn't important, but I mean, it's at least a national topic now.
It's on
topical.
the stage. It's on the stage. You know what has worked? Not even worked for me, but I haven't actively like pitched it in this way. It was actually yesterday, the newsletter I wrote on Upstream Data, their new Ohm data center, which is like a mini little data center that you can put on place at an oil or natural gas.
Mining rig.
Yeah, mining rig.
They call it data center.
My mom texted me.
Be political.
My mom texted me after reading that, was like, "Oh my God, I finally get Bitcoin. Like this
Really?
makes a lot of sense." Like, yeah.
I
And my
like
father-in-law, because Ohm got announced on Friday, or excuse me, yeah, it got announced like last week. But even before that, I was talking about Upstream Data at dinner with him, like down the shore a couple weekends ago, and that was the aha moment for him, was the creating efficiency in oil and gas fields.
Yeah, I mean, if you're not pro Bitcoin, you hate the environment, right? Like, that's the meme we're going with.
That's a great way to shut down the whole, you know, like boil the oceans with mining too. It's like there is a lot of trapped energy, and this is what you do with it.
Exactly, and because the alternative is you flare it into the atmosphere, and it's 30 to 40 times worse. And like once you have that framing, I have these two anecdotes with my mother and my father-in-law. Well, they both were like, oh, like this is interesting.
But I mean, not even that, right? Like you have a direct value on the waste energy, right? Like, you know, everyone has a dad who told you how to turn the lights off, right? Like now imagine if you turn the lights off, like you made money, right? Like that's what Bitcoin unlocks, right? It's a natural market-based price for energy usage around the world. And it creates an additional incentive there to not just like fuck around with your energy. I mean, like we look at like water, for instance. Water is one of the things that I'm really worried about as an individual who wants to survive.
As all individuals.
Fortunately, I know that my Bitcoin will be able to purchase me water into the future. But the main issue with water is that the cost is not equivalent to the real cost on society when you use it. So when you take a shower, it costs you cents, but really you're wasting dollars worth of water.
Do you know how much water it takes to make almonds?
No.
It's something like to make one almond, it costs like 300 gallons.
So my almond
of
milk
water.
is bad. It was bad for the.
If you're drinking almond,
I'm not drinking almond. I'm just playing devil's
But
advocate.
apparently, like almonds are very water intensive, just specifically as a good that's produced. Like
That's interesting.
The amount of water. That
I mean,
goes
so
in.
are cows, and we love cows, though, right?
Yeah. Yeah, that was like the scariest part of The Big Short, was the ending of The Big Short when they were like, Michael Berry's next big trade is water. Like,
Yeah,
oh,
when I
damn.
saw that, I just wanted to buy like barrels of water and put it in my
Yeah.
parents' basement.
Having grown up in California, I mean, I think it's going to hit places like that first, but it's a local problem too. It's going to be different in different places.
Well, the main issue is we need to price it appropriately, and that's the point I was trying to get at. Is that Bitcoin creates a price for energy around the world that's market based and permissionless, right? Like anyone can plug in a miner, no one can stop you, and you get basically the equivalent market price for your Bitcoin based on energy cost, right? So that is like a really, really insane concept that just blows my mind, and it's one of the reasons like people, you know, they call us Bitcoin maximalists just because we hate Ethereum. And really, like I think of myself as like a proof of work maximalist, right? Like I think the real innovation here wasn't blockchain; it was distributed proof of work, and it's like really mind blowing when you start going down that fucking rabbit hole.
Oh, and my day job, we're working on these type of efficiencies in the energy markets, and it is real. It exists. It is crazy how many efficiencies proof of work mining in particular creates. And that's the first incentive outside of supercomputers where this trapped energy can be useful. And people don't realize that. Like, people love to hate on energy companies and oil companies, but if you think we're not going to need fossil fuels in the future, like you're not thinking. Like,
Wait, we might not though.
Well, if we have nuclear and stuff like that.
Well, I think. Do you think fossil fuels will be the cheapest form of energy to mine Bitcoin?
Well, up to this point, no. I mean,
And I think
75% is renewable.
I think it'll go even cheaper.
But I agree with that. But like, you should also work to make those efficiencies in the oil markets.
Oh, absolutely, of course.
But that's fuck. I just lost my train of thought.
I apologize.
That's I lost it. It's gone.
Yeah, what you were talking
Fossil fuels. You were talking about fossil fuels and
here's the point I wanted to make. There was, I forget exactly where it was. I think it would have been Germany. So Germany's been trying to transition to renewables pretty hardcore, and specifically with solar and wind, you depend on the weather. So if you have like my freshman year at DePaul University, there was 60 straight days where the sun did not break the clouds. Like, it is the Windy City, and it's the Windy City not because of the wind, because of the politics. Many people don't know that. So like, there was like 60 days in Chicago, my freshman year in college, where the sun did not come out, and it probably wasn't that windy. So like, if you're depending on straight up solar and wind in that city at that particular time, you're not going to have enough energy, and energy costs are going to go up, and things are going to get crazy. So you need a mix of renewables and fossil fuels.
Well, you're gonna have nuclear.
And nuclear. I mean.
Wait, it's not actually a windy city?
No, the Windy City is because it's politics. Because it's like,
I always thought you guys just had like 20 mile an hour winds all the time.
No, Chicago, it's called the Windy City because the politics are so corrupt and quote unquote windy.
I never knew that.
Yeah.
I mean, the one I like, I mean, you've got this whole idea of upstream data, but I like the idea. I mean, I live in a place that's pretty cold most of the year. And also is powered, the heat is basically electrical powered. They don't have fossil fuels. I think, I at least am hoping for a decentralization of mining into heating systems. And I know people have sort of taken.
I think we'll see that.
We've seen that in Siberia, right?
We've seen the direction there, but I mean, that's a great way to decentralize mining. And, you only have to be as efficient as a heat pump. You don't have to be 100% paid for with mining.
Right. I think that happens when ASIC development plateaus, right? Like right now the ASICs go out of profitability way too quickly. I think we'll hit a point where you'd be an idiot not to put it in your building-wide boiler, for instance, stuff like that. It is really interesting. I've noticed traveling, which, by the way, everyone should do. I've always reminded people. Europe tends to have a ton of electric heat. We don't do that in America. We have no electric heat here.
We have
no one
cheap
does it.
Oil and gas.
Yeah.
And a lot of places in Europe don't.
But still, it's all electric heat, right? There's you have electric heaters in every room.
Yeah,
and
a
they're on the
space
wall
heater in
and stuff.
Paris when I went there.
We don't
in
have that
December.
here, right?
No.
If you rented an apartment and the heater was an electric thing on the wall, you'd be like, I'm not renting this apartment.
Yeah, it's going to burn down.
Yeah.
That's
That's
like space
interesting.
heaters
Well, of course,
taboo here.
they see it the other way. They, talking to my relatives out there, so let me get this straight. You pump flammable gas into your home, and then you light it on a thermostat in the middle of the night while you sleep. Is that what you do?
Well, no, the natural gas thing, just on a tangent, I mean, the whole idea that you have people with gas stoves in apartment buildings who you just or you're trusting your neighbor not to leave their gas on overnight is the most crazy thing in the world to me.
We both live in those type of apartment
Yeah,
buildings.
that pretty much blows my mind that happened.
Yeah, if you have a Fight Club scenario happen.
Yeah.
Where you
But
leave for
at
a
the
trip.
same time, if you put electric heaters in apartments, people will freak the fuck out.
I'm watching
They're
Fight
not
Club
happy
tonight.
for it.
Sorry to my wife, but we're watching it tonight.
What, Fight Club?
Yeah. No, but it is crazy. Yeah. Yeah, the energy conversation gets heated, and pun intended. And but it's very nuanced though, right? It depends where you are. Depends how much a certain type of electricity is where you are, and the supply and demand of it. And it's a very nuanced conversation. Everybody's it is obviously a very diverse conversation as well, but I think we have to realize there's going to be a mix, and it's very, again, contextual for where you are and what part of the world you're in.
Yeah, I mean it's strange having something like Bitcoin. It's not just a world currency, but like you're saying, it's a world currency for energy. Mm-hmm. So that's two fundamental things that now becomes global, both energy prices and just prices in general. Just really, prices, everything can be. When you take out the controls, why should it be more expensive to buy, I don't know, I mean, something that's price controlled, for example, can't be price controlled if you can buy it anonymously with Bitcoin. It's harder. So you flatten the world a bit, which would be interesting.
It's a permissionless petrodollar.
Right.
Sure. I mean, it's funny when you think. I was thinking of that earlier when you were talking that we say petrodollar. We're literally talking about a monetary system tied to energy. So how strange is it now that Bitcoin now it's not just energy.
It's a manifestation of it.
Yeah, but we're tying now three things. It's not just energy and money. It's energy, money, and information. Sort of like we're getting sort of an internet money now, not a physical money. So it's like you see an evolution there, which is pretty tantalizing.
And meanwhile, we have some idiots that are trying to break that tie. Like they think that's a benefit.
Oh, dude, we got to go proof of stake is better for the environment, man.
We're going to look back on this in a few years and laugh, I think.
And we're already laughing.
I'm looking at tweets from 2017 where I'm like, the exchanges are all going to be the stakers, and meanwhile, Binance just announces every day they announce a new coin that they're staking, and that they're going to give special rewards to people, and everyone's just bringing their coins in.
Yeah, what was it? They're 6th or 8th?
Yeah, they added Komodo.
Yeah.
Which is not a prop. Like, I got shit a little bit on Twitter. It's not a proper proof of stake coin.
What?
But I mean, this made me think of something right now.
But still.
There seems like there's for education, to become an educated Bitcoiner, it's not just reading books. You actually have to experience certain phases.
Exactly.
I don't know if you've talked about this, but the idea, like, you gotta get excited about a shitcoin at some point.
Oh,
you
yes.
should drop it early, but you should do that. Like, you should have that experience. You should mine, even though it's a stupid idea to personally mine.
Download the wallets, download the wallets, mine if you can. That's what made me realize proof of stake was stupid. Like, I had like a small amount of a proof of stake coin and it was just like staking. I was like, this doesn't make any sense. I'm not doing anything. Like, why am I making interest on this?
Yeah, I mean, but it's all these things. Like, there's certain lessons you got to learn by trying, and that. So I can't really, like, when I meet somebody who's just into Bitcoin or into cryptocurrency, usually not Bitcoin, they're gonna say, I want to mine, like, 'cause we all wanted to mine,
Cloud mining. There's always cloud mining.
Or yeah, I mean, cloud mining came a little later, but like, why did when Litecoin came out, like, people were excited. Oh, I can mine at home again because like ASICs had taken off. And that just gets repeated. Every new wave has to go through those cycles. Like, new wave of people who are like brought into Bitcoin, they get seduced, and it's just a question of do they learn the lesson or do they not learn the lesson?
Well, what is that next wave? Because it was ICOs last time around. People were saying maybe IEOs, initial exchange offerings.
IEOs are just ICOs.
Yeah,
they're just ICOs.
I know, but like,
I think we're gonna go back to proof of work altcoins.
To like pure proof of work launches.
Yeah.
Pre-mine?
Well, maybe not like a pure pre-mine. It'll be like they know the algo ahead of time.
Yeah, so what Nick Carter...
They basically do like a kind of pre-mine where they're just the main dominant miners in the beginning, stuff like that.
But don't you think, like, it's sort of been shown that you got to have ASICs? I mean, I know that's still being...
No, yeah, you have to get to... I think you have to get to ASICs, and that threshold from when you're not at ASICs to getting to ASICs is like super important. And then once you hit ASICs, you're going to be in like a super centralized ASICs mode. And you have to get past that point to get to a more distributed ASIC. And that's the key with the POW life cycle, is that you have to get past that whole point. And this whole idea that you can have like something that's ASIC resistant is really just you have centralization that decides to change the algo, because that's the only way. Because like ultimately, specialized hardware will always be more efficient than general purpose hardware. Right? So like you have to have a centralized factor that changes it, and you're just holding yourself back. And I think getting past that threshold is going to become harder and harder over time, right? So like that's going to be a major issue for new proof of work networks. But I think we'll see them just pop up and die and pop up and die. And
yeah, no, that's been the crazy... Is it red herring that like ASICs are bad? Like,
ASICs are great.
ASICs are great. Like, you
and they're
want
good for home
specialization.
Miners. Like if you're a home miner, like you can order a purpose-built machine and plug it in.
Dude,
like it's way easier.
Going back to Upstream
than doing
Data,
general purpose.
Upstream released a tweet today. Their first customer, who's running that Ohm data center, they mined a block within the first week. Granted, they were contributing to a pool.
They were in a pool.
Yeah, they were in a pool, but one of their miners found a block. Like, they didn't get the whole 12.5 Bitcoin, but
wow, the block reward's so small now.
be interesting to see if you ever get it, like some place where they subsidize natural gas, if you get people putting these into their homes or
that's
something.
what
You
happened.
know?
All college students were like mining Doge back in the
Every
day.
college is going to have to stop offering electricity with their rent. Any kind of landlord that offers it is going to have to stop. We saw cases in Germany where they had the
Tesla.
free EV plugging for the cars, and some guy was just running miners in his trunk. You know, like they have to stop that. Like any kind, and that's what I was talking about earlier, where there's a cost to waste, right? All of a sudden, you have this free market decided cost to your waste, and all these places where energy is subsidized and essentially wasted because they're subsidized will have to stop. Otherwise, they'll just run out of money.
It's great. It's beautiful. It's beautiful. Just like the incentives of it all, and it's beautiful. It's multifaceted too, because it creates these incentives and energy efficiency, and then when you're holding the token and low time preference and not selling it and combining all those together and to figure out how to be as efficient as possible and then how to save as much as possible for the long term. I think it's overall good for humanity. Like, and I wholeheartedly believe this. And people are like, you never want a deflationary currency or depreciation, like, or deflation. You never want deflation. Like, deflation's evil. But I think I truly believe that the deflation is evil meme is some Orwellian bullshit that people, for some reason, cannot get over. Like, why would you not want to pay less for something in the future?
Yeah, I mean, that's like something about that word deflation sounds bad, but if you also ask people, would you like things to get cheaper over time? I mean, they're not going to answer no, are they?
Yeah.
I like that meme.
Yeah.
Cheaper over time.
Cheaper over time. Like, why is that crazy?
Orange coin.
It gets
number
crazy.
Go up, cheaper over time.
But I'll play devil's advocate here. It gets crazy when you like bring crazy creditors in the mix and you have like a bunch of creditors that are out there. And yes, deflation's bad for them, but it's just like contain your risk. Like,
Yeah,
I
time
think-
preference.
What helps here is that because it's code, like we can divide it infinitely, right? Like one of the issues, right, with a deflationary currency in pre-Bitcoin times would be that we can't divide it infinitely.
mhm.
So you would have issues where you when it comes time to spend, you'd have some issues, right?
Well, let's be completely honest here. Like Bitcoin at the protocol level, that's probably not true with fees. So like this is why we depend on like second layer tools or protocols like Lightning Network, now state chains and
You
stuff
go
like that.
subsat on Lightning.
You can go subsat. And so, Richard, I guess we could end. I feel like we've been here for what time? Or like
It's
what?
been 2 hours.
It's been 2 hours. Like, are you optimistic about the future of the Lightning Network, the future of these transaction layers?
Yeah, I mean, of course. I mean, and that's why Lot 49 is built on Lightning. We think that, I mean, I think a lot of people who actually got into Lightning also had been thinking about mesh. I mean, I've heard that from other Lightning developers that actually it was like mesh that brought them to Lightning, sort of thinking about mesh and the idea. You hear micropayments. I mean, we have some kind of cool, like fun cases for micropayments, but that's mesh is sort of like the quintessential. It's like this textbook micropayment system. So yeah, I'm totally optimistic about that and about Lightning and I see what we're trying to do is really just a great application of Lightning. I mean, it's really that's all it is. And we're going to see other applications, but this is just this is one we think that can really unlock a lot of communication, ground up communication systems. But we're going to see others, and that's why another reason I'm optimistic about both Bitcoin and what Lightning can do for Bitcoin. Absolutely.
Well, you're somebody who makes me extremely optimistic. Thank you for doing what you do. It's seriously so cool, like what you're doing with GoTenna and Lot 49. Again, as adult, it's been crazy to see how much I've learned from the things you built. Like mesh networking was never on my conscience before you explained TX10 for the first time last year. I was like, holy shit, this is crazy. And thank you for what you're doing.
Thanks. I mean, I really appreciate what you and Matt, have been talking about it on air, and everything you talk about is great. But I really, it's like I feel like I'm really the avatar for this idea. I didn't invent it. I'm just pushing it, but it's resonating really well with people, and that really pushes me forward just to try to make it the thing that everybody wants.
Yeah, I mean, Richard is both a freak and a friend.
Yeah.
He listens to the
Thanks.
podcast. You listen to the podcast.
Absolutely. I was a long time listener before
and I consider you a close friend, and it's just, I'm glad that we finally got you on. It's been a long time coming.
Yeah. I'm sorry for letting you know this was happening last night. Richard and I confirmed yesterday. I told Matt last night, I was like, oh, dude, we've got GoTenna.
I was like, oh, fuck yes, I'm there.
This has been the quickest 2-hour plus episode. This has been a lot of fun. Thank you for coming. Thank you for doing what you're doing. Any last words for the freaks out there? Anything we can do? Any call to action that you can put out there that we can help push GoTenna or TX10 or Lot 49 forward?
Yeah, thanks. I mean, I would just say go to Global Mesh Labs. We have a link to the white paper. We're still looking for feedback. This is still in the protocol development phase. We're working on simulation, so there's plenty. It's all open source. If you're a developer or if you're a developer, get in the code, work on, you can help with the simulation. We've got a guy, Will, who's one of our, he's an intern who's working on the simulation, but we can always use more help with that. TX10 is all open source. This stuff is still proof of concept, but we need people trying it and giving us ideas. So, please contribute. And if you're not a developer, read the white paper and, give us your thoughts. We'd love to hear what you think. But thanks.
Bang, bang. Matthew?
Stay humble, stack sets.
Peace and love, freaks.
Where we should clap.